No? Ah, my box is over there. This is a little small for me, and a little too Mac for me.
That's a Mac.
Yeah.
Wait, Andrea.
I'm not going to touch it. Chance to test. Yeah, that's fine. Just leave the video. I'm sure the PowerPoint will work, but it's always the video. So. And it's not a very fast chip, so the video might be a little. TFW.
Okay.
And the PowerPoint.
PPT.
Yeah.
And all the video?
The videos are in there in case we need them, but it should be embedded already. It should be inside the PowerPoint already. I just want to test one and make sure it works. You copy over. Good. We'll do a quick test. So we'll go right ahead down to slide. Keep going. Just first.
Yes.
Just click see if it's loading. On time. Yeah. Perfect. Everything works fine. Yeah. That's all we need.
Yes, you can take.
Thank you.
To you.
Sì, Andrea.
All of the pieces are almost there. It was in my head.
Questa cade lo schermo un attimo. C'è solo quella roba.
Sono donne nude?
No.
Le teniamo per la fine mattina.
Se togli la chiavetta, vai in prendi questa cartella.
Tutta quanta?
C'è solo una presentazione dentro, quindi io
Allora
prendi la
prendo la
presentazione.
Mi è piaciuto.
Come l'hai settato? Che togli lo schermo?
Sì, guarda, ti faccio vedere. Vedi così.
Io lo metti qua, no?
Aspetta, secondo me adesso.
Perché l'hai staccato?
Ah sì, ecco.
Una parte.
Tu lo vedi un po' più piccolino qua?
Everything was so disappointing.
C'è la slide, vedi, non so se hai delle note.
Delle animazioni.
Allora, Luca?
Oh, yes.
Ma c'è un sacco di persone registrate che non ci sono.
In che senso?
E persone registrate paganti che non sono qua.
Cazzi loro. Cioè, mi spiace perché non riempie ancora, però è abbastanza pienino. Non sembra vuoto.
No, ma dobbiamo per forza partire perché sennò poi dopo...
Ah, sì, sì. Sì, sì. No, ma quello... questi funzionano già, i mic.
Sì, lui ha detto di lasciarlo lì, così, perché gli serve solo per l'audio e noi proviamo...
Allora...
Senti, ma lui chiede, cosa chiede?
Quale?
Perché entra adesso?
È il presidente di Islam, Andrea Laura.
Gli altri due? Dobbiamo aspettare che arrivi Alberto.
Chi è Alberto?
Lo ricordi? Basta per me. Alberto?
Are we ready? We can start? Ok. No, lascia pure lì.
Lo lascio lì, non devo prendere in mano. Ok. Chris.
It's time to start.
It's all right. Well, first of all, thanks to every one of you for coming here. It's been a long trip for me since the announcement of the following week to make it happen for real. I was talking at the Moth Invitationals to Josh McKnight. Josh is a 2012 Moth World Champion, and he was telling me, when I read about it, I thought, wow, it's a super cool idea, but it's almost too advanced, it's never going to happen. But we made it, and we made it because of you, because of the people that is coming here today, because of the sailors that are coming to do this event. The following week was born out of passion, of course, and the will to put together foiling enthusiasts. Because my feeling is that even though foiling has been around since basically 1906, when an Italian called Forlanini put a boat on Lake Como on foils, even though it was motor back then, and even though Graham Bell claims from US that he did it too. But more or less, it was like, it's almost a 100-year-old technology. But only in the last 10 years, we have seen foiling rising in interest in the sailing world. And I would say only in the last 2 years, with the America's Cup interest and other big boats foiling, we have seen that is possible, and then it can be used on far more boats than was initially thought possible. Now it's almost becoming it's almost maniac. There's you can see almost fin people trying to put foil in a fin just for the sake of it. So everybody's trying to foil. What I think is that somehow the technology is still at an early development stage, where the engineers need to work very closely with the sailors and listen to them for how to design and make this boat for real, because there is not a clear science there yet. So that's the reason mainly behind the Foiling Week, to put together the thinkers, the engineers, and the tinkerers, the people that play with the boats and that make modifications because they try the things on the water, so that we could compare the solutions that each of us have used to fly and to fly stable. These are the main two things about foiling. So we put together a fleet of foilers and a fleet of engineers. And we are here together to discuss and to see what the state of the art is, and to talk to each other to see if somebody else's solution can also work for other boats. So this is what the Foiling Week is about. I finished and I let Andrea, that is the chairman of the forum, to introduce the speakers and perhaps to say whatever he likes about the
Okay.
following week as well. Thanks again for coming.
Okay, thank you, Luca. And good morning to everybody. Let's start with the forum. I have to say that I was very pleased when the end of last year, Luca talked me about this idea, and I found it very, very interesting. As you know, I'm Andrea Ratti, coming from Polytechnic of Milan. I'm a teacher, and so we are very used to manage the organization of forum, convention, and so on. But I have to say that this idea of Luca to collect and join together the research with sailors and having the possibility to discuss the last result of the research and have the possibility also to test the result of this research in the prototypes that we can have here. It's very, Luca said, a cool idea, but I think that it's not only cool, but also very interesting, and develop in this field, I'm sure that is related to the possibility to have a quick exchange of information between practice and theory. So the idea when we discuss about the organization of the forum was to define which could be the most interesting topics in the world of foiler. And of course, it's very, very difficult to do this, because there's a several number of items that we can discuss on that, and we try to summarize in some session the possibility to discuss of that. So the first idea was to have a structure, as you saw in the final program. We divided the forum in 3 days, working in the morning, and we start with a keynote speech who has the role to introduce the topic of the morning of each day, and after that we divide it into session, a thematic section. The idea is to have the possibility to use time for all the speakers to introduce their presentation and collect the question at the end of the morning. Each morning we will have at least half an hour for discussion with all the speakers involved, and so I think that this could be one of the aim of the structure of this forum, to exchange ideas, to have several people involved in the research in foiling application to discuss and to exchange these ideas. This is the structure of the 3 days. Of course, we decide to start with a survey of the history. The history of foiler is not so. It's quite recent, but in this last year we saw a very quick development on this. On the application and the way of use foiling system to sail. The second session is more focused on all the tools that could be used. Very nice. There
is the GC32 flying in no air.
No.
I was like,
he's making his own air. Okay, and this is, for example, this is a good example of we try to put in the third section that are solution studied on from the point of either hydrodynamic or hydrodynamic solution that can allow a boat flying that way. and also all the research activity done in this field. The last two sessions that we scheduled for the third day are more focused on the construction, so all the solutions that in this year have been developed for realize using composite material, which of course help very much to obtain this result, reduce weight, and so in this application we know very well that it's very important. And last but not least is a matter concerned with the sailor, with the way in which we can work to optimize the use of this application. This could be, I think, a field in which in the following year could be there could be some further research activities, and we can discuss on Thursday about that. So I don't want to use too much time to introduce because we have a full program this morning, and I asked Martin Fischer if he can take place here and introduce his presentation. I think that Martin Fischer doesn't need a long presentation. I imagine that
well,
all of you...
His boat was flying in no wind 1 second ago, so... Maybe there was a very long towing line, but... Was it the publicity stunt?
Yeah, a perfect timing. I'm starting presenting the boat and they pass through there. Of course, he has a great experience in this kind of application with the design team of Groupama, with Oracle application on F18. And so I think that he has several information that can share with us, and this is just what we asked him to present his experience and having the possibility to discuss of this result. So please take place here. I can start your presentation. If you like me to change or do it by yourself. Okay. Okay. Please.
For the time.
Yes, I can.
Yes.
So
No,
if you want, I can let you know.
Yeah, okay.
When you have 10 minutes more.
Mm-hmm.
This is your image.
Okay. Hello. Good morning, everybody. Well, thank you very much for this nice introduction. And first of all, I want to say I'm very happy being here. And should I take it? Oh, it's fine. I will manage. Well, can you hear me, or shall I take a microphone?
No,
fine.
It's only for the streaming.
Oh, okay.
But
okay.
they can hear.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm very happy being here and having the opportunity to talk about some work I did over the past years. When I prepared this talk, I was not really sure what or how I should organize it, so I thought I'll give a sort of overview over the foil development in general as far as I see it, and of course in an overview you first have to start with those people and with those boats where it all started. That will be the first part of my talk. Then I'll talk a bit about equilibrium of forces and how to achieve stable flight, and and then towards the end, summary and outlook as usual in every talk, I guess. So first of all, historical development and what I call the early days. For me, there were three iconic boats in the old days. Let's say where it all started. The first one, that was Monitor. Probably you've heard about that boat. That was a fully foiling boat, designed in 1957 by some engineers or group of engineers at the U.S. Navy. So that's really a long time ago, and I think what they achieved is pretty remarkable. I couldn't find numbers how fast they were going, but at least they were. Sorry?
13.4 knots.
Okay, that's.
But it was their own measurement, and I believe they were honest.
Yeah. So that's really quick. We still struggle to achieve that. Well, we get there, but it's not that easy. And this is a boat that is 25 feet long, so SRC class, and that's really outstanding. The boat was clearly far ahead of its time, and it was definitely at the leading edge of technology at that time. And what I've read is that it cost a fortune at that time. The price or the development cost for the boat at that time was $20,000 which was at that time really a big amount of money. But they achieved it, and that's somehow where it all started, I'd say. Then the second boat that for me is really one of the important foiling boats is the Mayfly. Designed and built probably by Philip Hensworth, but James knows more about that than I do. Actually, I learned yesterday that he was also involved in the development of that boat. He got the A-class world speed record. Actually, A-class, that's not the A catamaran, international A-class, that's one of the categories in speed sailing. At that time, they created 4 classes, A, B, C, D. And the limits were, if I remember correct, just sail area, and A was 150 square feet. So, and in 1972, it got 16.4 knots, which seems very low today, but at that time that was not that bad. Well, compared to Monitor, it was slow, but it was a small boat. And what was really remarkable with that boat was that Mayfly, she was really stable and pretty easy to sail. At the beginning, Phil Hensworth really struggled obtaining or achieving stable flight, but he worked a lot on the foils, and actually a big step forward for him was that he added to these straight foils vertical tips, and that changed it a lot and made the boat stable, and so he really succeeded flying, and continued, of course, the research, and 5 years later he achieved 23 knots, which is already not bad. And as I said before, Mayfly is, in my opinion, really one of the iconic foiling boats. And then the third one, that's Icarus, and I'm really happy that James Grogono is here. That was about at the same time, also 1972. And well, you correct me if the numbers are wrong. But they achieved, just with a modified Tornado, 21.6 knots in 72. The photos of the early version of that boat that I saw showed much bigger foils than towards the end. So the foil size went down. Also, the configuration changed. And in 1985, after numerous modifications, the top speed during the speed week they achieved was 28.15 knots, which is really quick for a 20-foot boat. And especially if you take into account, first of all, the materials they had, and I guess also the budget, because you told me yesterday that it was pretty much on a shoestring, what your development budget. So that was really a big achievement, and I'll put this. That was really a big achievement, and as I said, for me, that's again one of the iconic foiling boats. And again, Icarus was very stable and for her time very fast. Then in these first foiling boats, what we could see is they all relied on non-movable V foils. That's a relatively simple setup to achieve heave stability. It's just self-regulating, and it does not require any complex control or steering mechanisms. It's self-leveling, but it comes at a price, and that is you have more drag than with other solutions. So there are solutions that are technically probably more difficult, but that are promising in terms of drag, and that's what I call the second approach. So foils with active foil control. There again, there are a few boats that I think are outstanding. One is Longshot, that was designed by the Kettering brothers and Russell Long. They achieved in 1990 a top speed of over 37 knots. And well, you can't see very well, probably you all know this boat, but it had a sort of sensors like a small water ski at the front. And with that water ski, there was a lever, and with that they changed the angle of attack of their main foil. And they had two main foils, one on each side. It's really difficult to see, in L shape, and the rake of the whole foil changed. And thus they achieved a heave stability, or they controlled the foiling height just with this sensor, and that worked really well. Later on, there was even a commercial version of that, the Hobie Trifoiler, which was also a really quick boat, and for a production boat, it was quite outstanding. And these guys, again, they continued, and two years later, they did more than 43 knots, which is really quick, and again, that's very remarkable because at those speeds, 43 knots, you start getting into an area where cavitation may cause problems, and they obviously could deal with it. So a really outstanding boat, I think. Then the Wraith, that's a bit apart, because the Wraith, that was a production boat, and it was not really made for, or it was not designed for record breaking, to break speed records, but the main focus was to produce a foiling boat that is easy to sail, with a fully automatic flight height or foiling height control. And you can see here there are wands there. There's one mechanism. This is actually pretty much similar to what they use today on the Moth. The only difference here was that the wand was further back, and it was basically directly attached to the foil. But yeah, the designer was Sam Bradfield, and as far as I know, he was one of the pioneers of wand-controlled system that are now widely used in the Moth, and that are so successful. And then, of course, the Moth. That's an absolutely outstanding boat as well. As you can see, in the first trials for foiling Moth were with a sort of V shape. And it's funny, this V shape was then declared illegal because it was considered as a catamaran. And therefore they were forced to find a solution with one single foil. And in the end, it turned out that that solution was much better, actually, than the V-foil configuration. And today, well, you all know, they achieve speeds I think the top speed now on the Moth is in the mid-30s, right? 35. Yeah.
Yeah.
For such a small boat, that's really enormous. And also upwind, it's unbelievable how fast they go upwind. So that's a real success. So what sorry, forgot this. What you saw, the first step were V-foils, the second step were T-foils, basically, and then mainly Team New Zealand, but Oracle as well, they developed these L-foils, and again, it's interesting that these L-foils were again forced by rules. So at the beginning, the rules were intended to produce boats that would not fly, and then, well, people found a loophole in the rule, and they came up with this solution. So it's a sort of L foil with a tip. Once the tip is down, it points upwards, and that provides heave stability. So that's somehow in between the active. No, it's not a T foil. It's not an L foil. It's somehow in between. And this concept has it starts now ticking down from the America's Cup, just with the GC32, the Phantom, and the Nacra. And I'm sure there will be others that will follow. I come back to this foil configuration in more detail later. And then I must not forget, of course, the kites and the boards. I won't talk much about that. First of all, I don't feel really competent to talk about that. And this is really pretty much different. You can see they have pretty much it's like a small airplane, and as far as I got it, the control is just done by the sailor. He just with his feet. The thing is so small, and so the sailor can react quick enough to adjust it, and you don't need an inherently stable system, because this configuration basically is pitch stable, so the fore-aft trim is stabilized because there are two foils, but there's, as far as I got it, no inherent heave stability, so it relies entirely on the skill of the sailor. But as I said, I won't talk about that much. To summarize the historic development, we saw different solutions, and obviously the driving factor in all these cases is to maximize performance. That's why we are all into it. And but under constraints, and these constraints are obviously get sufficient lift. That's the first thing. Otherwise, if you don't have enough lift, you can't fly. That's obvious. But then get the lift such, or get it in ways such that you achieve sufficient heave stability to keep the boat manageable. Then achieve sufficient pitch stability, again to keep it manageable. Go for a solution that is sufficiently robust. Obviously, on a lake, you'll go for another solution than for an ocean-going boat. And of course, cost. That's always an issue. And I'd say the importance of those constraints is, for me at least, in that order. Not cost, that everybody has to decide for himself at which position is cost. But if we take cost apart, I would say it's in that order. And now I'll just go a bit through those points. So the first thing is lift. You have to create lift, and the question is, how much lift do you have to create? Obviously, with a big foil takeoff speed, you can take off very early, but it's pretty draggy. With a small foil, takeoff is much later, but you have less drag once you're foiling. And but there isn't, for each boat, there's an optimal takeoff speed, let's say. And just if you look at a very simple model, what you see here is this is for a C-class hull. This is the lift-to-drag ratio, so vertical lift, Fz, to drag as a function of boat speed in meters per second. So here 2, 4, up to 40 meters per second. And this scale here is logarithmic. Yeah? So for instance, at 2 meters per second, a C-class hull, in order to carry the weight of the boat, let's say 320 kilos or 3,200 newtons, it creates 200 times less drag than what it has to carry. Then when the speed goes up, then this ratio gets down quite quickly, and at one stage it will drop below the lift to drag ratio of a foil, which is typically between, let's say, 8 and 15, depending on the speed and stuff like that. And if you just draw a line and check where you cross the lift to drag ratio of the hull in displacement mode, then you actually get the takeoff speed, the optimal takeoff speed, which is in this case for the C-class around 8 meters per second. Of course, this model is a bit simplified, but it shows pretty nicely what you have to look for. As I said, the real one is a bit more complicated because during the transition phase, of course, the lift that is created by the foil does not switch from 0 to 100% immediately, but it's a continuous transition, and that has to be taken into account. So it is a bit more complicated to get the best takeoff speed and hence the best size of the foils. But I would say these are details. Then the basic thing is just check how much you have to pay in terms of drag to carry the boat, and then make sure that that's less that will pay with your hull. Now we saw, so this is basically the first step, let's say, of a design process. If you go for a foiling boat, you have to decide somehow how big the foil has to be. Then the second point is what kind of configuration do you want to use? We saw before there are different possibilities, inverted T, V, whatsoever. And the T-foil, I won't talk much about T-foils because you probably all know how it works with the one, so that's a clever system. And the thing with the T-foil is that due to its geometry, the vertical force and the side force, the lateral force, are basically completely uncoupled. You can adjust them independently just by changing the angle. And that allows that you use the sensor that just keeps the boat at a stable flight height. As I said, I won't go into that. I think there's another talk later, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, about Moth, so I'm sure he will go.
And also Stevenson in this morning.
Yeah, so I won't go into that. Now the second solution is you go just for a straight foil at a certain angle. And if you look at the forces that you have to compensate with the foil, you have basically the weight and the side force from the rig. And on a typical catamaran, this ratio from weight to side force is about 2 to 1. That's roughly, of course, that changes. That depends very much on the width of the boat and things like that. But let's assume it's 2 to 1, which is pretty much the case for the GC32 or for the C-class, for the America's Cup boats as well. That's more or less that, and that just comes from the geometry of the boat. The righting moment you have, the height of the rig, and roughly 2 to 1. Now, if you have a foil, let's say here, at an angle of 45 degrees, then obviously the side forces, they will automatically balance, so the leeway of the boat adjusts automatically, such that the sum of those two is 0. And then once that is done, then the vertical force depends just, or the ratio of the vertical force created by the foil to the lateral force depends just on the angle, nothing else. Yeah, and that means that in this simplified model, actually that the vertical lift of such a foil, once you're sailing on one hull on a catamaran, since the righting moment then is more or less constant, does not depend on speed. You go twice as fast and your vertical lift doesn't increase. And that means if your angle here is not right, even if you go really fast, you never can fly. And the only way with such a foil to fly is to get the dihedral right, such that you get the same ratio of vertical force to side force as weight force to side force. And you can, that's just geometry, so for a ratio of 2, we get an angle of 63 degrees, which is really almost horizontal foil that's very, very flat, and in most cases in waves, for instance, not practical, because you get problems with ventilation and all these things. So this is obviously not a solution to fly, and therefore, yeah, and just I must come back to this, and this is due to the fact that in this case, the side force and the vertical force are completely coupled. Yeah, if you double the side force, you double the vertical force, but the ratio between the two remains always the same and depends only on the geometry. And then the only way to get away with that is add the second foil, and this second foil has to push to leeward. And then if this is again the foil with 45 degrees, so just the foil on its own has a ratio of 1 to 1. Then you add here another foil that produces half of that. Then you get from this foil this vertical lift, and due to the fact that you create also additional side force, this foil has to create more side force, and therefore creates more lift. And then the two together, then you get the vertical force, the right value of vertical force to side force, and you can get away with it. And actually with this second foil, when you put the second foil into it and they work against each other, then you uncouple again side force and vertical force. And now with this configuration, vertical force depends again on boat speed, which was not the case before. And with this you can fly, obviously. Then the L foils, that's somehow in between. Actually, what you do with the L foil, more or less, well, not entirely, but more or less, you take this here and stick it to your foil, more or less. And the advantage is that now this part is further to leeward. That means the loss in righting moment that you get from a straight foil on the windward side is less dramatic. And just a few definitions before we continue. I call this angle here, with respect to the horizontal, the tip angle, and well, the other points, that's not really important, but the tip angle is really important. And this tip angle actually makes that again you uncouple side force and vertical force, and that gives you the heave stability. And actually what happens is, if the boat starts flying, comes out of the water, that increases the leeway, and the leeway then introduces a component on this part of the foil that reduces the lift. It's a reduction of effective angle of attack, and therefore, when the foil flies higher, even if the tip is not piercing yet, so even if the water surface is here, when you fly higher, due to the coupling, partially coupling to the leeway, you reduce vertical force, and the boat stabilizes itself. And this coupling, let's say, this reduction of angle of attack can, in a simplified way, just be computed by a simple cosine thing. Actually, if you increase the angle of attack by, so the leeway, yeah, by 1 degree, then this is actually the factor by which you decrease the angle of attack here. And if you just draw that function, something like that, so here you have the tip angle with respect to the horizontal, and here you have the reduction factor of angle of attack. So that means, for instance, if your tip angle is 10 degrees upwards, then if you change the leeway by 1 degree, your angle of attack on the tip is reduced by 0.2. If you have a foil like this, so the tip angle 0, then obviously there's no coupling, then you're back to a T-foil and you need an active control system. And the further you go up with the angle, the more heave stability you get, simply because this reduction of angle of attack goes up. And I'll show that. And so that means it's nice in terms of stability to have a tip angle that points upwards, but in terms of drag, it's obviously not nice. But I'll come to that later. And this is just an example. This is a foil in each. So this is the tip. This is the strut. And if the boat sails with leeway, in this case it goes in that direction, right? And what I had here is in this case, I computed the lift distribution along the foil from the surface. The free surface is here. Yeah. So the tip is well under the surface. And this is with a rake angle of 3 degrees, of 2 degrees, and a leeway angle of 0 with an asymmetrical section. So you see you have a certain amount of side force, but you have a huge amount of vertical lift. And then this is the same foil, and the only thing that changed was I increased the leeway to 3 degrees, from 0 to 3. So I increased the leeway by 3 degrees, and you can see, obviously, the side force increases, but the important thing is the vertical force goes down by more than a factor of 2. We can see the same here. This is basically the same. It's actually not the same foil, but the same idea. Again, this is, here it was rake 3, leeway in this case is 0, and then leeway is 1. And this is the lift distribution along the strut, so along the vertical part. Then here, this is the junction, the knee. How much time?
10 minutes.
Okay. And this is the load, or the vertical, this is only the vertical part. This is the vertical lift. No, it's not true. This is the lift perpendicular to the foil along the tip, so this horizontal part of the foil. And you can see here we have something like 3,500 Newton in the maximum per meter, linear meter. And if we increase the leeway just by 1 degree, this goes down from 3,500 to 2,500. So a very substantial reduction with only 1 degree of extra leeway. So that was just to show how efficient it is in terms of heave stability to have a tip that points upwards. And in all these cases, I had a tip angle of 30 degrees. You see this here, this angle here with respect to the horizontal was 30 degrees, so that provides for pretty efficient heave stability. And then when you design a foil, you have obviously make a decision how much tip angle you want, but because a tip that points upwards creates also a side force, but to leeward, which is not what we want, obviously, so it creates more drag. And therefore you have to check during the design process what is the heave stability. And that means how does the vertical force created by the foil change if the boat flies, let's say, 1 centimeter higher or 2 centimeters higher. And as an example, I have here such stability diagrams. So the isolines here, that means this dimension, that's the vertical force created by a foil. This here, it's difficult to see, but this is the foiling height, varying between 0 and ½ a meter. And this is a design parameter. That was actually here, I varied the length of the tip of a foil. And this first diagram here shows a foil that is inherently stable. So for a given tip length, let's say here, if you increase the foiling height, yes, that means if you go this way, then the vertical force created by the foil goes each time down. Yeah? Each time you're crossing these lines, and at the beginning it goes down very gently, but then once you have reached, in this case, a foiling height of 40 centimeters, then this gradient becomes very steep. So the boat will stabilize its flight height somewhere here. And then in the middle here, that's a foil that is pretty much unstable. Actually, you can see that the lines here go slightly down. So in that case, if you increase the foiling height, then the vertical force increases also. So you're thrown out of the water, there's a positive feedback, and that won't work. And only once you're falling really high, then it becomes stable, but it's marginally stable because it doesn't go up like here, it just goes a little bit up. So this would be a foil. This was actually a foil with less tip angle, and that was just not stable. And then here's something in between. Actually, this was an interesting foil. We tried that also. This is a foil that once you take off, it is first unstable. So during that makes takeoff much easier, like an airplane actually at the start. And then once you are beyond 20 centimeters of foiling height, only then it becomes stable. That was a test because with such a foil here that is always stable, in order to take off, the only way because as soon as you take off just 1 centimeter, you lose already a little bit of vertical lift, so you never get out of the water. And the only way here to get out of the water is that during the takeoff speed, the boat accelerates. Otherwise, you would not get off the ground, let's say. Here, it would be much easier, but it did not really work. We tried, but it was an idea. Anyway, I want to just show this as an example of the sort of stability diagrams that you have to look into during the design of a foil. So that was heave stability. In the list that I had shown before, the next point was pitch stability. I won't go much into detail. We can discuss that if you want, but it's somehow unrelated with the foil. Actually, the pitch stability comes just from the elevator here with such a configuration. And what you can show is that pitch stability, actually, a very important parameter is the distance between the foils and obviously the surface of the elevator. So the bigger the elevator, the more pitch stability you get. But again, with a big elevator, you have more drag. So again, you have to decide or to make a trade-off between ease to handle the boat, ease of sailing, and performance. It's a bit like always. There's no free lunch. We can, if you have questions about that, we can of course go into it. But I think it's another issue somehow. And yeah, that means I'm almost at the end of my talk. So what we saw is with the L foil, an upward tip is really the driving parameter for heave stability. Obviously, a large tip angle creates also more drag because, as I said, with the leeward force created by the tip, you have to create more side force and therefore more induced drag and more surface and so on. And in terms of pitch stability, a larger rudder elevator again provides better pitch stability, but creates again more drag. And those are actually two trade-offs you have to make. And during the design process, you have really to decide how far you want to go in terms of drag reduction against heave and pitch stability. And obviously, it can happen that it might be better to go for a potentially slower boat, but that can sail at a higher performance of her theoretical performance. And that's actually what we did with Group Hamassi. Compared to other boats in the fleet, the foil setup was much more stable, but also more draggy. So our top speed, measured as theoretical, was definitely lower than the top speed of other boats, but we could sail the boat or the sailors could sail the boat at almost 100% of the potential, and the others couldn't. And in the end, although we were theoretically slower, the speed difference over the course was above 15%, and that was just handling, most of it. So quite often it's a difficult decision what to do. Then outlook, I think the foiling multi-hulls are just at the beginning. I'm not talking about the Moth here because they are have been well into it for years. But for the multi-hulls, I think it's pretty new. Obviously, there were boats 40, 50 years ago that foiled already, but that was just for speed weeks, and that was a very small group of enthusiasts. Now I think we are really at a stage where it gets into almost normal catering sailing, and I'm sure that soon proper classes will appear that allow for proper racing without handicap, so really racing boat against boat. And I think in the longer term, this same technology will also be applied to fast cruising multi-hulls, and even for coastal cruising offshore, I'm not sure, but probably yes, not immediately, but I think the same technology will find its way also into cruising boats. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin, for your presentation. Yes, if you agree, I suggest to keep all the questions. I mentioned that many of you could have some questions or the interest to go deeper in some details on all the information that Martin kindly shared with us. But probably if you want to keep time, it's better if we listen all the presentation. After that, we can discuss all the topics, because I also think that there could be some information coming from the other connected to what, for example, Martin said just now. Do you want to do this? Sì. Sì, sì. No, 10. No, 10 minuti. Un po' 10 minuti. Then I introduce the next presentation, that is by James Grogono. I'm very happy to meet him here. I have to tell a little story because it is the first time that I have the opportunity to meet him. And we exchanged some information about his own presentation over the weeks before. And I wrote him, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to meet the father, the foiler's father, and he appreciated very much this way of calling him. But I have to say that when he was working on his Tornado and joking with foil, I probably had 1 or 2 years. So I think that the story of the foiler received a great contribution by James Grogono, and so I think that he has a lot information to share with us. If you like, I use the PC for you.
Oh,
yeah?
I can hold my. I say next slide, please.
Okay.
And you, that was so kind.
I do.
I'm so excited to be here. I can hardly believe it. And I want to thank Professor Andrea Ratti and Luca Rizzotti for asking me, and also Paul Larson, who mentioned my name. And you can imagine the phone conversation. You mean he's still alive? Yes. Is he confident and continent? And I wish I had come forward with a stick, because the story I'm talking about starts 60 years ago, and I mean exactly 60 years ago this week, in July the 9th, 1954, in a small laboratory, and I'm going to talk about that for a few moments as we go through the story of Icarus, which today is going to be all pictures, because a wonderful contrast with the talk just heard, which I was hanging on every word. But maybe tomorrow I go into theory, but today is going to be a picture story of Icarus. It is about the design, and that little subheading is, we had failures at every stage, and they were every sort of failure, design failures, structural failures, calculation failures. This was a wonderful way of learning by failure leading to success. And because no one got injured or damaged, and the costs were tiny, and we did it all, we've made all these foils with our own hands, our own tools, all out of wood to start with. It was enjoyable and exciting, and of course at times it was pioneering. So before we go back 60 years, we'll just take a quick look at the end result. Next slide, please. Good old-fashioned 3-view. I'm sorry it doesn't come up well. There'll be better pictures, but a 3-view sent to me by a wonderful Frenchman, just showing even really poor on the screen, so I'm on, the configuration side view and end on. You're all familiar with this, but this is the fully evolved version because the earlier ones were so different. And one more slide, please. That's a better picture. Now, that is a record-breaking run, and you see the same configuration with this inverted T rear foil a long way out the back, and the front foils mounted on the crossbeam of the standard Tornado, and as you very kindly said, it was completely stable and a joy and effortless, and we got up to this fantastic speed of 28.4 knots after many tries and many years with the same equipment. That was 1979. Next one, please. And here is the interesting fact that for 35 years, Icarus has not changed. This was a recent outing in Speed Week where we still won the boat prize each day of Speed Week in Weymouth just a couple of years ago, because all the kites and boards were going much faster, and this was still the fastest boat. So it's very interesting that 35 years of not changing shows either this is a backwater sport, or else that we got it fairly satisfactory 35 years before. But 35 years is a very short time scale. I want to go back 25 years more. That's 60 years ago this week. Next slide, please. And there at the top, you see, a little wind tunnel. That's a propeller driving a little test platform, and there's a little airfoil. This is in air, not water, and I had these spring balances, and I could measure lift and drag. And I was an arrogant young scientist, you see. I was in fact still at school, but there was a little laboratory there, and I got this kit out, and I compared, if you look on the right, the symmetrical wing, asymmetrical wing, and sail plan, and I was measuring lift to drag ratio 60 years ago. It's amazing. And just look at the performance of the asymmetrical wing with its lift to drag ratio of 7.5, symmetrical wing I go up to 4, and the sail plan not even reaching 2. So there was I in this position of the fact that all we need to do is to make wings for sailboats. But I chose to go the other way and thought, what would happen if you put a hydrofoil underneath the sailboat? And so, completely on my own, I promise you I had no idea anyone had done it. I made my first design. Next one, please. And the first design was 5 years later. This is 1959, and this design, which was, of course, original out of my head, had the unusual feature of a nice little V-foil front and back, a two-rung ladder foil at the back, and there you see on the left, the hull has disappeared, because once you were foilboard, you had a wedge. And with the hull suspended under the crossbeams, you knocked out the wedge, and the hulls flashed out the middle, and you went off on your foils. Never built. Indeed, it wasn't built at all, because I wasn't willing to tell anyone. I was so certain that this was going to be successful, and go faster than any other sailing boat had ever been. I kept this secret. I would not tell anyone because someone might copy me. And I was an impecunious medical student and then a very impecunious young hospital doctor training. And so I kept this secret until something terrible happened in 1967. Next slide, please. In 1967, next one, please, sorry.
Yes.
In 1967, Yachting World published the Tornado. Now, the Tornado had a higher power-to-weight ratio than any other yacht by a factor of more than 2 ever designed. It was wide. I'm sorry for the 3. You know how wide a Tornado is. It was wide. It was light. It had this huge sail plan with an over-rotating mast. 1967. This was a genius design by an electron telephone engineer called Rodney March. I couldn't sleep at night. Here was someone who'd made the perfect foil platform. All I had to do was to make the foils. And I lost sleep. I couldn't go to, I lay awake, night or fretting. I couldn't concentrate. So I had to get hold of a Tornado, and I had no money. I found a school friend to help buy it. And we acquired the Tornado and made some foils. Next slide, please. So here we are, arriving down at the Tornado with a road trailer containing these foils. This one goes up through the hull, that's the rain foil, and the other ones screw onto the front. Next slide, please. But we turned up one day and screwed them onto the Tornado. This is the bow foil. This is a canard, you know, light-laden, controlling front foil, main foil at the back. We'll have a picture of that. This was not what we call the aeroplane configuration, but you can see the screw holes, and we fastened this on. I may say the Tornado had some little hardwood blocks put in to the places where the screws were going to go, because you know at the bottom of a Tornado there would be 2 millimeters of plywood. So there had a little bit of preparation had been put in with the builder to put in attachment points. And next slide, please. I'm sorry, this is a view of myself, very fuzzy, either praying to heaven or making it clear that this is all mine, but it shows the end-on view of the 2 foils. It shows the configuration with vertical struts and huge wooden foils, which we crafted out of our own, in my father's workshop. And they were far too large. Next slide, please. And transport to the water was impossible. This, in fact, most of the subsequent members of the original syndicate were there helping as friends then, steadying this thing on a high-level trolley, and then with heroics launching it into the water with a lot of people getting wet who not intended to get wet, but it took 4 feet of depth before it would float. And this was September 1969. Next slide, please. It is in the water. There's the little lightweight strut there, the main foil underneath and the bow foil, you see. And making the point about canard, here is the centre of gravity carried on the main foil, just about on the centre of gravity, with the pitch pole force to count for. The pitch pole force frightened us. We were saying, we were worried about it perhaps too much, but it was obviously likely to be stable. Next slide, please. And there, I shouldn't make extravagant claims, but it was the in the UK, and of course it was absolutely the first foil height flight on a standard craft. But of course, by this time we'd found, sadly, that Monitor had been there before, and Donald Nigg had been there before, and a delightful third American called Apollonio. And they're all 3 people I corresponded with, and I started writing magazine articles and books. It never stopped from then on. But the excitement was completely ridiculous. I can't tell you how slow it was. It wasn't just slower than a normal Tornado, it was miles slower than a normal Tornado. We were stupid enough to organise some speed trials, but it worked, and that was what was exciting. And so we had to get rid of these huge foils, we had to get rid of this impracticability, and the thing fell apart for the first, second, and third times with the chocks and foils breaking, and we went away and rebuilt the same winter. So 1970, next slide, please. 1970, we have. Do you mind if I point with my finger, or shall I use this? Can I use
the pointer, no.
Does it work? No. The front foil is the same configuration, much smaller foils, but now they are steering from the front, and we have a rear-facing rudder, a rear-facing tiller, and then the back foil is self-evident, is rotating on a beam fastened outside the hull. I'm sorry, I should have just, I talked to the slide.
red button.
Thank you very much, and apologies. So here you have the longitudinal beam outside the hull with these wooden inserts into the tornado's own beams, and this foil rotates around in a great circle and then latches onto the centerboard box. And this here was hung on pintles. We could do all this in deep water. So we'd go off with the boat's own rudders and centerboards. You can often see the rudders lying around on there, and the centerboards are pulled up, of course. And then you put the front foil down and put these rearward-facing tillers were quite satisfactory. The connection between the tillers would go from the back of the boat to the front. And during that transfer, you had 4 rudders, not one of them under human control. 2 at the back and 2 at the front. And so a certain amount of sea room was required if you weren't going to avoid disaster. But you see, it was stable, and it was practical, and the speed measurement was difficult, still defeated by a standard tornado, but in formal speed trials, 14, 15 knots, normal tornado 15, this thing 14. Next slide, please. There's just a little bit more detail of this strange ease of steering with a rearward-facing tiller, no difficulty at all, and this is perhaps we've almost covered it already, this main foil. Next slide, please. Now, this is a very important picture. I wanted to make sure no one else could play this game, so I made it look so difficult no one else was able to get on it. So you had to be out on a trapeze, standing out way over the side. You actually don't need to stand out at all. You can sit on board, as you'll see in a moment. But the troubles we had were endless, and here is the repair of a large hole made the previous day when the foil had failed to locate onto its little bracket there. Now, I must move a bit more quickly. I think I will, but you'll tell me when 20 minutes is finished. You'll tell me, because I will then
8 minutes. 8 minutes.
But we're going to move much quicker. We stopped doing it because there was no speed measurement. There was no point in doing this. And we went away and devised the speed trials, which is a separate topic. I'm sure you all know, 500 meters, no rules at all, very accurate measurement, and an outside observer verification. You can't do your own measurement. That's all speed sailing is, 500 meter course. I've got the category list of the records at the end. I'll show you this time. So we went away and managed to set up a speed sailing competition and get a sponsor, and that allowed us to justify going into metal. Next slide, please. So here we have a journey into metal. The first thing is external beam put on the same tornado, and then this horizontal tube mounted on wooden shocks, all homemade, except we've got the extrusion tube, of course, put on these wooden beams so you could move it fore and aft. Next slide, please. And there's the aluminium front foil, aluminium alloy curved to the arc of a circle, ogival, by rolling a sheet and then letting in a flat plate at the back. You can see the epoxy paste filling the gaps there. So it was a perfect 7% ogival foil. And until yesterday, I thought it was such a wonderful thing because you had no problems with it. And someone in the room who should be named said it is the worst foil shape that's ever been invented. I won't mention his name, but it was something to do with the Australian Moth class in the Mach 2, so you might guess who it was. And next slide, please. And so deployed, just by letting go, we used the trapeze wires to hold it up, and they're tight, wet wires, you can hardly see that one, with bottle screws to set it very rigidly. There's the vertical strut, which was 2 shaped aluminium pieces edge on, and there's the vertical foil. Next slide, please. And here's the rear foil, very familiar to this audience, but ahead of its time then. We suddenly realized what a wonderful thing an inverted T-foil was, and we worked with Philip Hansford, who should get the design credit. Mayfly had done it in wood the year before. We got confidence. Here are the fences. You can see the line of epoxy where these 2 sheets were welded together. And transom hung. There's a steel bar you drop down to connect it. And you could do all this in deep water in rough conditions. So we would go off the beach in Weymouth in 1 foot, 2 foot waves and fight to get these things down. And we'd go off a lee shore, independent of a support boat, never had a support boat, and deploy the foils for speed sailing year after year. Next slide, please. Year after year in the Speed Week. And just to remind you of the configuration, it looks a bit bohemian now because, of course, we all know this foil, with that far forward to give us a long wheelbase, came back on here, and this foil went back out there. And this is what I call a hybrid. It's not a canard, and it's not an airplane. And I believe the aeroplane people are suspicious about the stability of hybrids. So it was stable, and perhaps it was stable because we had such a strong corrective force whenever a transient would get you, because as soon as the bow started to go down, a whole lot more foil went in. That was the advantage of low aspect ratio. Next slide. And there's just a view to look at the configuration end on to try and make it clear what the foil. I'm more than halfway through my script, so it must be going jolly well. Now, if we had a third slide, please. Next slide. And this is just a reminder of what I have been saying, but it is important, the geometry is important. 45-degree dihedral of an ogival section and a tapering only from the junction downwards. So this section is parallel-sided, that section is tapering, and the symmetrical tip we put on for lots of reasons, and it's so familiar to you. But it doesn't matter whether it was first. It was, we evolved it with confidence. I think it was first. It was symmetrical. It introduced very little drag, but it set the boat in a groove. There were very strong forces. When you're going over 20 knots, this little piece here sets the boat in the groove and reduces the leeway angle, and it increases the aspect ratio of what remains left in the water. And when I first went on a jet liner, like I did yesterday, and saw those tips going up, I thought, gee, I know who did that first. Because, of course, I couldn't believe it the first time. It does a lot of things. It gets rid of the tip vortex. It does a lot of things in the hydrodynamics which are beneficial. It gives you an effective increase in wingspan, of course. So that was the evolved foil, made in aluminium alloy and costing us a bob or two, but not that much money, in 1972. And we never thought of a way of improving it, apart from this. And we still have it now. And it's the same. It hasn't deteriorated, it hasn't rotted. You can put the boat out there on the lake and sail it today with the 35-year-old foils. And so to a certain extent, it was a good story of evolution in wood. Now, don't think it was all easy. I want to show you how troublesome the foils were. Here's the next one, please. So here is a typical unstable moment, of which there were many. We broke things all the time. We had the tornado, of course, getting faster because of the Olympics. So the tornado was forever getting improved by the Olympic stimulus. I happened to be on the IYU multi-hull committee, and the tornado was chosen and conveniently kept. So after each Olympics, we got hold of leftover bits for almost nothing, often given, because the tornado people were moving on to a faster design. And so that was an unstable moment. The next one, please. And there is another unstable moment. But if you're not quite sure why there was an unstable moment with a lady at the helm, if we have one more picture, please. It was because we were enjoying royal patronage in the UK, and the helmsman was not very experienced, and I was in seventh heaven. And it's not indiscreet to say, she's a very lovely lady, and one-to-one with no one listening, it was exciting. I can only tell you that. We're nearly there. But so what happened was, we're just about at the end of the slide, I'm going to show you the speed sailing graphs. Next one, please. So what happened was we ended up with this platform so stupidly stable, anyone could sail it. It was breathtakingly fast. We didn't worry about the speed track. You simply went out there, got on the foils, and stayed there. Our lowest wind speed was 10 knots. You did have to go single-handed. 10 knots in your face feels like nothing. So you wind up and get through the drag hump, as beautifully described by Martin. You get through the drag hump and sheet in, and the apparent will go ahead, and as per table, it goes to 22 knots if you're going 20 knots. We'd sail along at well over twice wind speed, and you couldn't believe it. Speed beat no other boat on the water. Not a fast run, only 20 knots. But it was so exciting, you can hardly imagine it. And because you were using the apparent wind, it was steady wind. There were no gusts. And then you stop and turn around, and you go, oh my God, the wind's gone. Because the wind went from 20 knots to 10 knots in 10 seconds. And you sit there thinking, that's a pity, the wind's gone. And then you sheet on the other tack and build it up again. It was unforgettable, and it was new. Now we're on to the final slide, apart from the free sailing. And I only show another stable picture, nothing to do with the publicity for a book, which is out of print. So I just happen to have a few copies with me. And there you see how little fuss there is, really. Okay, there's a bit of spray, that's probably from the junction. But I often worry about the huge amounts of spray thrown by foiling boats. And it takes us back to Italy and Lake Maggiore, where a powered hydrofoil in 1910, steam-driven, went across a lake like this, making no wake at all, with ladder foils. So I'd like to end up appropriately in Italy by pointing out that foils shouldn't make spray or wake. That's what they're there for. They're there to cut the water surface cleanly and do the work underwater where it doesn't make any waves or wake. I've got 2 other slides, but have I got time? Promise?
1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, 1 minute, 30 seconds each. Final penultimate slide. This is 500 meters, the conditions I gave you, and just glance down the dates and the right-hand side. Great big crossbows in the hands of my great friend Tim Coleman, going from 26 to 36, and then this wind surface taking over from 86 to 93, and going up another 6 knots to this ridiculous speed of 45, and then a good friend of mine, Simon McEwen, Yellow Pages, Australian. Is that my time?
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough to say, except that there is a true hydrofoil, and there is our friend Paul Larson making this ridiculous further improvement at the end. So there's not time to show my last slide, which I can keep till tomorrow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much to James. It's quite difficult to compress 40 years of history in 20 minutes, so thank you for that. And I asked to Stevenson to take place, and we have now a great sailor. Probably we move to have a look on the experience of Moth. So here, 40 years of experience in sailing with Moth. We can use
your pictures.
Yes,
Mine words.
I take the picture.
James has done 40 years of foiling catamarans. I'm going to try and do 85 years of Moth history, but only 10 years of foiling. So I'll rush through that. And Martin also said he wasn't going to cover control systems and Moths, and Andrew McDougall says he's not going to do it tomorrow either. So I'm going to try and fit that in somewhere along the line, even though I didn't prepare it. So I'll get started. That's what I am.
Okay. You do by yourself, or?
Yeah, I'll just do that. I'll just hit one of these.
Yeah, right or down to go.
Okay. Okay, the Moth's been around for over 80 years. Nearly as old as the stars that were here last week. The difference is that the Moths don't look anything like they did 80 years ago. This is what they looked like 80 years ago. And stars still do. They come for the racing, we come for the speed and the racing. The Moth started both in America and Australia about the same time, 1932. And the idea of a little simple boat for one person spread around the world, and by the 1960s, there were enough in various classes that IYRU, previous to VISAF, decided they'd have an international class, and the rules were all amalgamated to the International Moth. But that's, sorry about the slides, I've pinched them from all sorts of places and they're not really up to the big screen, but that's the American Moth class, which is still sailing, and boats probably not dissimilar to what the first American boats were. The first slide I showed you was the first Australian Moth. This was the British Moth class before the amalgamation. There's the Europe dinghy, which was the French style at the time and became the International One design. Now we've got up to hydrofoiling. And it's a bit earlier than most people think, because this is Frank Raisin in 1974. That's an Australian cow. All the stuff sticking out of the water and in the water is plywood and sheets of planks of wood. He did sell it, it did fall, the hull is clearly out of the water. That's the best picture that exists. He's a modest old man, he's only 70s, he still sails international canoes very well, and I've spoken to him quite a lot about it. There's been a lot of innovation in Moths over the times. There's a wingmast that was built in the 80s. The class has got some simple rules. That's Andy Patterson in the 90s in England. Andy Patterson was also responsible for the very narrow hulls that we've had now. But before all that, we had the boats, you know, they were this wide, then they got that wide on the water and that wide on the deck, and the sails got more complicated. We had pocket luffs in the 1960s, we had square top sails in the 1960s. We've had carbon fibre since 1994 or something like that. The rules have remained roughly the same: 11-foot long hull, one hull only, one sail only, one person only. The sail area's gone from 75 square feet up to 8.25 metres over various rule changes, measured different ways. The beam got added in the 60s because there wasn't a beam limit, and then they put the wings on and they got bigger and bigger, so they got 2.25 metre, that's roughly the same as A-class, which was the carnet limit in Europe at the time, was what you could drive around borders without needing a carnet. And anyway, we've developed, and there's never been a weight limit. And the reason, that's why we've developed. That is Andy Patterson's boat on its side. It seems to have at least 5 foils providing lift. He's got 2 rudders. That foil there, I'm not sure what it's for, and he still seems to have the original centreboard in it. That's pretty weird. I hope to meet him next week and I'll ask about it. Another pioneer was Ian Ward, who that is in the 60s. That's a very narrow hull with a single centreboard with a hydrofoil on it and a rudder. No control system, no adjustments, move your weight and hope you don't crash. It crashed a lot. I saw him sail that boat a few years later where he had foils off the wingtips. He had like Martin showed a picture of the catamaran with the 2 windsurfer rigs with the paddles out the front. He had that sort of system on it. It still was stable in smooth water, and when he hit waves, one of the paddles did something weird and the boat would throw him off. He's now he's one of the pair of people from Sydney who have done the hydrofoils for a laser project, and they've sold about 50, they told me the other day. This is the first one which most people around the world saw. This is Brett Burville sailing his Windrush boat in the World Championships in Perth in 2000. And it's basically just 2 45-degree foils. There's nothing on the bottom of that. There's a little bit of structure, and it's got a T-foil rudder. He was fast in straight lines and smooth water. It's always smooth water in Perth. And he had trouble turning corners as well. It would throw him off on jives quite easily. I wasn't there that year. At that time, people were looking at other things. This is another one from Perth. I never met the man, but I've seen his name and I can't remember it. But he's got a diamond foil on the bow, not unlike Seafly, and T-foil rudders. And I'm not sure how successful it was, because it didn't get a chance to get developed, because about that time we had a big controversy in the class about whether people wanted foils or not, and then it turned out that enough people wanted it that they thought, too many people considered that they were sailing multi-hulls and they should get back to sailing monohulls. The class rules committee got together and decided that if it sat in the water and made more than one hull in the water, it was a multi-hull. So if you had foils off the foils and there was air could come through, you could see air underneath, it was a multi-hull. So the foils had to go below the water line. Went back to Wardy's idea, one centreboard, foil on the bottom, and the boys in Perth, John Eilert, Brett Burville, Garth Eilert, came up with this thing, and that's the basis of what we're using now. And I'll go now to the stability bit that Martin was talking about. The flap, the wand actuates the flap. It's spring-loaded forward so that the full position is to flap up when the boat is high enough for the wand to go forward. When the wand's back, the flap's down. Those 2 things with the aerofoil, it changes both the camber of the aerofoil and the effective angle of attack of the aerofoil to the chord line, and so it provides more lift with the one up, and when it comes to the stable position, it's about here, and if you hit waves and get too high, the flap comes up and brings you down again. The rear foil is nominally fixed, but we can twist the tiller to adjust the angle of attack. The early ones had a flip on the back, which was less efficient in that when you want to bow down, you got more lift and more drag on the rudder. When you want to bow up, you got not less lift, which detracted from the lift that was being given from the front. So my son and Andrew got together and worked out the twist grip thing, and all of Andrew's boats since then have had the twist grip. So I don't need to do that. It's hitting this one, isn't it? And so that was John Islet's first prowler with that system. This one's even got a vertical centreboard, which makes it very early in the piece, because they worked out fairly soon that you needed to rake the centreboard forward for two reasons. One was that it separate centreboard and rudder further, and the other one was that if you rake it forward, air entrainment doesn't go down the leading edge, it comes up, so you don't get ventilation. And I think that's Rowan heard about the boat, flew to Perth, jumped on the boat, said, I want one. And John Islet was making about 3 boats a year at that stage. This was Brett Verbel's last wingtip foiler, just before the rule change came effective. He took it to a regatta, it didn't go very well. There's Wardy flying a scow with the, it's not a wand at the front, it's a ski, as in that other boat that Martin showed, but the T-foil rudder, T-foil and the centreboard rudder are all there. That's Adam May sailing one of the Mistress boats, which was an English boat built when the prowlers were in, and they had prowler type rudders. It was all starting to happen. But Mistress and Prowler couldn't make enough boats for the market. There's someone else experimenting. I don't know where that photo came from or whose it is or what I assume it's a centreboard, but it doesn't have a flap on it, so it must have been out of control. And then Rowan came along. Rowan got his boat and got sponsored and became a poster boy all over the world. And we've all seen that photo on the teenage boys' bedrooms, and that's when the foiling revolution really took off. But no one could make enough boats until Andrew McDougall mortgaged his life and created Blade Rider, and suddenly Moth went from, well, I'll take a couple of steps back that were in my notes that I've skipped, but we went from, before the laser, having 100-boat regattas in cities in Australia, in Britain, in the United States. The laser appeared, and suddenly everyone didn't want to repair their wooden boat anymore. They went and bought a laser. And by the 90, I had 95 Moths at Worlds in Australia in 1995. By 2001, we had 40 in Japan at the Worlds. And the class was shrinking. People found the boats hard to sail. We had, a couple of years before the Blade Rider, we had a Worlds in Melbourne. We had 45 boats in Melbourne, and that was with 5 prowlers, I think, or the Mistress might have been there as well. So the class was shrinking. It never got said, but we felt we were in threat of losing international status, and Blade Rider basically bailed us out. Well, perhaps first off, Rowan and Ronston getting on posters all over the world in teenage boys sailing bedrooms. Meanwhile, John Islet continued to make prowlers, a limited number. Prowler and Blade Rider was a little better, but Prowler wasn't too bad for a while. People made foils differently. This is the Prowler foil. I think that's a Blade Rider foil, Mac, is it? Maybe not, but it was certainly different. They were more tapered. We gained the bulb at the front, which was a Tom Steer invention, I believe, and became demountable, so that instead of it packing into a box this big just full of hydrofoil, everything fits into the big white boxes that you see out the front. What's that one? It says Blade Rider. That must have been an early rendering. Class continued to develop. Bora brought a couple of those to the Worlds in Belmont. I threw that one in because I wanted to say that the class just does keep developing. There's Adam May with his version of it that he built. It's never been out of England. And there's Andrew with his Mach 2, which after he lost control of the company, they went to another builder, made some dodgy boats, went broken just at the right time. He came out with went back to McDougall and came out with the different boat, a better boat, and I think when we went sailing Hawaii last year, where they limited the fleet to 80, I think there might have been 65 Mach 2s and 15 other boats. We're going to hailing next week. There's 130 entered. I would have thought that probably 100 of them will be Mach 2s. What else have I got? This is a gratuitous picture of me and my son. That was the last boat that I did. There's English boat Ninja. The English people are still developing boats. They've got two factories, two companies over there producing exocets, and the Ninja people are down doing a rocket version. They're working on it. That's the Makita foil, designed by a couple of guys in my club and sold a few around the world. But the claim is that one of them bolted on the bottom of Bora's Mach 2 last October won the world, so there's still boats that are going. That looks like an exocet. I can't see, the photos aren't good enough for to see who it actually is. I think they're exocet foils. One of the versions, I think they have different versions, different weather. There's my son sailing a Monstro boat he built in Sydney. There's another boat that's available if people want to buy it. And there's my latest toy, which I'm going to talk to Tom about later. That was the end of my talk. So we don't need that anymore.
I think it was the last.
Control. How did I go for time? Probably about right.
Do you want the last one?
No, it doesn't matter anymore. I think I was going to talk about controls. We said what the wand does, what it does, at what rate it does. We have to vary. There's different settings for different conditions, particularly wave heights. There's three lots of wave heights. There's the wave heights that are about that big, that you can just sail straight through and keep going. There's the wave heights that are this big and a long way apart that you can sail up and over like that. You can sail through them okay most of the time. It's challenging. And then somewhere in between you get the wave heights that are just a little bit more from the hull to the foil and about a boat length apart. And they're nearly impossible to sail through, but only the alpha over there can do it and a few others. The blokes that sail in all the time. That's why there's 100 strings on those boats over there, and that's why you see lots of pictures of people crashing them, because unless you get all the strings in the right place, you probably don't want that one up there, do you, Mac? You want to see one of yours. Oh, yeah, that one. I sold Moths in 1963 briefly, in 1975 briefly, in 1990 briefly, and then when my teenage son said he wanted one in 1998, we started building Moths. And since 1998, I've sailed Moths pretty well every year. I've built lots of boats. I've made lots of things that worked and many that didn't work, and like James said, many that broke. So consequently, 2 years ago, I got sick of carbon dust and I bought one of these from him. They're a wonderful piece of kit. I missed that. But, you know, it never gets out of your blood. You go back and try and make something else again. All right. I started with the stars last week. Did I say it already? Yeah. Okay. They were here going slow. They still look the way they did 100 years ago. Next week we're going to Hailing Island going fast. We're going to have just as good a racing at 3 times, 10 times the speed or something. And the Moths don't look like they used to be because it's a development class. And one day they won't look like they are now. They're going to go faster still. All the one designs that we keep creating just sit there and look obsolete in a few years' time. So that's what development boats all my life. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, thank you very much, Phil. And I introduce you the next speaker, or couple of speakers, who are Davide Tagliapietra and Douglas Schickler. Schickler or Schickler? Schickler, that's right. Their history is probably shorter than the one of Grogono and Stevenson, but I think it's very interesting. They are now engineers. They work a lot on structure, on appendages, on Moth, and so on. So they have some recent application to show us and to share all the knowledge they have used to, something about their knowledge used to develop this solution.
I'll need a moment to get the latest file across, if you don't mind.
Ah, okay.
So, copy.
They developed some new details over this night, so we have the last release.
What is it? What language is it?
Override.
Override. And then we'll go begin.
Perfect.
So, good morning, I think still. My name is Douglas Schickler. I'm half of Schickler Tagliapietra. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of things, how it goes together and stays together, we hope. I want to thank Andrea for inviting us to speak today. And I wanted to, of course, thank the previous speakers for introducing us to the topic. Particularly Martin Fischer, I have to say, I enjoyed your keynote. I thought it was, there's a few points of crossover which I'm going to try to address during the talk. Our topic is foil engineering developments. It's less of the flow and hydrodynamics, very little of the structure of the foil blade itself, and more of the mechanisms that keep it in its correct position or allow it to change position. You can go to the next slide, Davide, thanks. Quick overview of our talk. We're going to split the task. There'll be a little bit of company background. I'll breeze right through it, only because we don't have the history or the name gravitas that some of our previous speakers have. We'll go through a few of our recent projects. I'll talk about the object of foil use as we see it. And we'll go into 3 case studies about the engineering challenges that those foils present to us. And then we're going to briefly discuss some of our future work, and then we'll wrap it up. I think we'll run out of time. Go ahead. Schickler Tagliapietra grew out of our partnership, or our partnership grew out of our collaboration during the 32nd America Cup in Valencia. We sat back to back for 2 years and worked out many problems together and decided that we weren't going to go on working against each other. It was much easier to work together. Over the course of our respective careers, we've been involved in 4 America's Cup campaigns and 1 Pole Ocean race. We work in both design and engineering. Neither of us is a mechanical engineer. My background is naval architecture. Davide's is aerospace. We got together because we have a passion for simulation-based engineering. solving problems that you can't do on the back of an envelope. And simulation-based engineering usually takes place these days in computers. It can also take place in the woodshed or in the workshop. In that, I want to point out, we consider ourselves a little bit more than just structural specialists. We don't simply give you a laminate table. We work across materials. We work with systems and hydraulics and control mechanisms quite frequently. We'll get to more of that in a little bit. Forward, please. Recent projects. Currently, I'm working quite a bit with the team from DNA on the gunboat G4. Our task is the funded element analysis of the entire boat, work on the VPP, and under that also foil developments, including the turbo package for those clients that wish it, a full flight system of foils. We had a nice chance to tutor our colleague in the room who will speak, I believe, on Thursday. Is that correct? Edo, you speak on Thursday. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. On the White Dragons project, an innovative adaptation of an A-class catamaran. Davide had the opportunity to join the Challenge Italia C-class team. Didn't quite make the race in Falmouth, but hope is, of course, to carry on the innovative work that they did there. We've had some decent work in Mini 650s, most recently with a prototype design. Also a little bit hamstringed by budget. One of our highlighted projects was Kugelai. It was on a previous slide. A very lightweight and innovative canting keel offshore racer. In the 34th America's Cup, Davide was brought in as an external consultant, late in the game for Zona Rosa, and that led to a full-time position with the design team in this cycle. For us, the object of foil use, this isn't just to go faster. Yeah? Everyone wants to know that you can go faster with foils, that's right. When I speak of foils here, I'm going to say any lifting surface that is not there solely for producing the side force opposite the sail plan. We're talking about angles of dihedral that can, of course, trade wetted surface for induced drag by lifting the boat from the water, as you see with the White Dragons here. There's other things you can do with those foils. You can influence moments. Everyone knows you have to do that in trim on a Moth, as an example. And again, this is, I believe, your work, Martin, involved with the Orma from Groupama, working on trim control through the use of curved foils. Another illustrious English colleague of ours developed, of course, working with roll moment using transverse foils. Forward. Ultimately, you can also uncouple and even reverse the force balance, which Martin mentioned, with the use of foils. Control foils are very good for this, but also their placement on the vessel has a very, very big role in achieving this uncoupling. You can go forward. You guys all know the example of the Moth, and we've talked about sail rocket before. So those are the three things that I think you can achieve with a foil, particularly. And as a result, highlighted in red, along with drag reduction, which is a clear #1 and primary goal, foiling can allow for the decoupling of the sail carrying power, the ability of the boat to produce stability from, for example, its heel angle and mass. Heel angle not really that important for catamaran designs, but obviously a primary driver for monohulls. The Moth is a great example. The Moth has reversed the need for heel angle to carry sail area. Your maximum riding moment is actually achieved heel to windward. Whether or not that's a stable situation depends on the course you're sailing and the ability of the sailor. Am I speaking too fast? Is it okay? We'll go forward. How do we evaluate the pros and cons? Every foil creates drag if it's producing lift. We find it necessary to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of a velocity prediction program. For us, that means a 6-degree of freedom velocity prediction program that can adequately weigh the trade-offs of all of the different directions of motion and rotation. A VPP is nothing more than a force balance. Force balance, which Martin nicely did graphically for us before, in 3 planes. Such a VPP has to be customizable in order to adapt itself to novel situations. We're talking about development classes after all. It needs to have user-defined trim variables that can be fed to the optimizer in order to find best solutions. And it'd be best if you can allow the VPP to be coupled, or couple these trim parameters with each other. In that, a customized VPP is the best choice. There are others here in the room who will talk, I believe, about VPPs in more depth, and I'm going to leave it at that because our topic is more about the systems that those inspire us to create. The use of those VPPs confirms that more unstable systems can yield more speed, but they have to be managed somehow. That produces challenges with the trim variables we've thought up. Those trim variables can be flap angle. They can be, obviously, rudder angle, simple things like that. It can also be the cant of a keel or the dihedral of a canted foil in an AC-72 as an example. The challenges we find as engineers are what range can we actually achieve? If the specialist from the VPP and the hydrodynamic side says that we need to have a cant angle of plus minus 25 degrees, is that even possible in the envelope of the craft? The other challenges are, how do we bring those forces now concentrated in the foils into the vessel through controllable systems that precisely position or adjust these foils in small periods of time, much the way a one system on Moth. Scaled up to larger vessels carrying some tons, that can create quite some engineering problems. And that is where ST finds its niche. And it's at this point that I'm going to hand off our talk to Davide, who will discuss the first few case studies.
Yes, the first case study we want to present it's a monohull. It's a standard 60-footer ULDB designed in the 90s by Corey, and the owner of this boat asked us to try to look for enhanced performance. And because it was a pilot, it was quite sensible to this kind of topic. So, as always, Doug tell me, before you run, you have to walk. So this is, for us, was the first step into the foil design and the design of the system guiding this foil. So we were used to design canting keel, also canting lifting keel, but with this boat we had the chance to add something else. So we were trying to think about something that was embedding the side force creation, so dagger boards, into the keel itself. So we were start thinking about the 5 degree of freedom keel system. So adding to the standard canting and lifting, also a rotating bulb and winglet. Each one of those was are able to rotate and create the kind of lift. So please, next one. Yeah. So up to the upwind full power is a standard boat, like you see. There's a keel with a bulb with a movable winglet that can be oriented in a way that they can create the most efficient side force. So this is a standard sailing mode, but can eventually be a little bit adjusted. For example, if we think about an upwind with light air condition, we can put at the back of the keel and try to get some extra lift from the slot between the front foil and the backward one. And we can still play with the bottom one, changing the angle independently. So far there's not a big difference from a standard monohull. But if we go to the downwind condition, we can see that eventually where maybe the stability starts to be not so important, we can start to play and work with varying the stability, pitching the angle of the swinglet differentially. Now, this was the first exercise. If we think about a bulb that is not completely full of lead, and we think about to exchange lead with the dynamic stability, we are getting closer to the concept of the foiling of a monohull, of a big monohull. The step to arrive that is very long. But anyway, going into the detail of creating such a system, please, Dan. So this is a little bit the video to show how they can move. The ability of the winglet to move was this arm here.
In the corner, the down.
Okay.
Left corner.
One moment. Ah, there. Got it.
Okay, the ability was 180-degree possibility to orient these winglets. And how you can achieve this? You can achieve with an internal system, basically a couple of double rod, double action ram that are engaging a lead screw and enabling this kind of rotation. So we can have another look.
We get deeper into the system.
Deeper into the system. Obviously, the challenge of this kind of system is the space available. We obviously cannot increase the standard volume of the bulb for driver issues. And obviously, also, we have to use very strong material because the moment that this system can create is very huge. So this was a nice exercise to try to compact as much as possible a complex system. This is a naked system where you can see actually how it works. What is missing here is also the actuators for the winglets that are standard RAM attached with the lever. So this is basically the design. If we had the possibility to go through, please, next, through the construction phase, and so there was a nice exercise also for designing the hydraulics connected to the system. You need to push to the extreme also hydraulic system to get these movements because of the space and the force. So at the bottom here, we were using like system to up to 700 bar. So, and in the top part, instead with the canting and lifting keel, we could use lower pressure. So finally, this is in the assembly process. You can go on then. This is almost completely assembled, and obviously at the end we could put the fairing. So the bulb was looking like a standard one at the end. And finally, the boat a few months ago went into the water. And now we, I mean, the hydraulic and the system are tested. We're going to try to start the sailing test. So this was the first example how we can, with the system, we can try to put foils into a monohull, a big one, and try to work a little bit, to experiment on it. Another, jumping on completely another topic, a cat. We have seen a lot of flying cats so far. We had the possibility to participate on this challenge. Unfortunately, it didn't succeed in putting the boat in the race course. It was a very nice exercise for us, especially in the structure department and in the system. We had the ability to put together a parametric model and an optimization process that allow us to change and optimize this kind of boat. This is a great class because it's one of the two, actually, where the pure development is allowed because there is no restriction in weight, for example. There are box rules, but no restriction in weight and no restriction in the movement of the foils. That is very important. That's why I want to describe in the next slide the kind of system is at the base of, let's say, the new concept of the foiling mode. We have seen with Martin how foils without articulation can be stable. But we can also play a little bit with the system to enhance the performance. The concept is we can push a little bit in the extreme of having an unstable foil, but because of the system, we can make the boat stable. And a clear example is the Moth. In the sea glass, in this case, I was working in trying to enlarge as much as possible the range of movement of the duckboard within the space that we have in the hull. So I could achieve a cant range of 28 degrees, and a rake range of 10 degrees, and a yaw range of 7. Obviously, cant is used mostly for upwind and downwind condition. Maybe Giorgio in the next contribution will explain with the VPP the differences. And the rake range is very important to be able to stabilize, to change the pitch of the foils in different conditions, in different speed. And the yaw range can be useful for misaligning the wake of the duckboard and the rudder, or reduce the windage of the boat if you can just completely rotate the platform relative to the apparent wind. By the way, the concept developed here, please the next one, was basically trying to achieve those three rotations, those three ranges, using a spherical surface upper bearing. So there is not a trunk, but there is a suspended upper bearing lying on a hypothetical spherical surface that allows all the rotations decoupling them. Another feature interesting is the flush bottom bearing. So at the bottom, because the dimension of the boat, we were able to avoid to have anything rotating and out of the hull, and working only on a slot that was able to allow the movement of the rake and cant and the yaw, but keeping the hull flush. So, please. Yeah, this is a little video of
little high-speed demonstration
of the system in action.
Did I get the right one? No.
There. You see the 28 degree of cant. And then the cinematic was not yet developed at this stage, so just two screws to lock it in place. But you can see the ability in that position to move, okay, slide up and down, and rake forward and up, completely independent. So this can enhance the foil performance by a fair amount. Another important aspect we developed late in the design stage was the rudder. At the beginning, the boat was not born to fly. Actually, by the end, we were designing the boat to be able to. So at the end, we had to adjust a little bit the stern to be able to get a raking rudder system. The rake rudder range developed was 10 degrees. Still can be a tilting rudder. Easy to remove with one pin. Basically, the concept behind is having a ball at the bottom of the hull, and it is partially suspended, and still the leading edge is at the just below the back of the bottom part of the hull. So, trying to reduce as much as possible the negative aspect of a transom rudder. Please go to the next one. And so you can see a little bit the details, and basically you see the nose is always at the bottom of the hull. So that was a little bit the two features I wanted to present as engineering exercise we did. The boat at the end sailed, but without the wing, and at a certain point last year, the development stopped. But just as a please, the next. I had just after that study the possibility to work in the late stage of trying to enhance the performance of this boat as an external consultant. So for me, it was a great chance to see everything. I was working in a small one, in a bigger scale, but basically the concept I faced was very similar. So I let Doug going on, talking about monohull.
We're finished.
Yeah. Time.
Oh, that's only just getting good. That's too bad. Okay, then we'll skip straight ahead to the next slide. A few slides, actually. So this is to briefly present a case study. Stop there for a sec. About offshore monohulls. The idea being with a different set of trade-offs, a different need for lift. How can we take an existing craft and improve its performance? What systems do we need to develop for that? So the starting point was a very lightweight boat with effectively no limits from the rules, but we had to work inside an existing case with an existing straight dagger board. The goal there was to create a combination of moment generation and drag reduction. I'll explain how we're doing that to anyone who wants to ask me after. Go forward. So skip forward, please. We wanted to work with outboard foil. I can again go to anyone who's curious into the details of why. It meant that we had to displace the lift foil forward of the vertical strut because of the conflicting high pressure and low pressure sides. It occurs with an acute dihedral because we do still rely on some heel angle to get stability out of a very wide monohull. Go forward. This is the system that we developed. It's a flat-based system on an acute angle one-sided wing, very loaded, able to carry several tons. And if you go deeper into the system, Davide, we can look a little bit at how the mechanism achieves this. In order to use a swept foil at this dihedral, which is also mechanically adjustable, we had to reach out to automotive engineering to create a constant velocity joint that can transmit this kind of torque through a range of angles and then pack it into an essentially sealed container under water so the lubrication can do its job. A challenging mechanical system and one that is currently under construction. I think that will finish up that section.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I want to talk quickly about our future work, wrap it up. We're working on an ultralight foiling and transportable catamaran. This is a catamaran that you can eventually put in the trunk of your car. The basis of it is a company in Czech Republic called Compotech, which uses inflatable technology. We owe them a debt of gratitude for working on this project together. It's quite low cost, very, very lightweight for its size and stiffness. You see here a 65-kilo person standing on. The boat's deflecting about 12 millimeters over probably, 14 feet of span. Going forward, we're also working on a Moth here in northern Italy with the yard Venezia. The details are still quite secretive. I wish we could go into more. And with that, I'll wrap it up. Our accelerated presentation with a thank you for your attention and a few special mentions on the right.
Thank you, David and Douglas. Sorry because the time because we are a bit on late, but very interesting your presentation and the possibility to transfer all this kind of research also in monohull, in boats, and so I think it's very, very, very interesting. I introduce now the last two speech, which are focused on tools to support design, and so I invite Mario Caponnetto to take place. These two speeches are focused on the possibility to develop CFD and VPP tools and analysis to support the design and foiling solutions. That means that over this year, both Mario Caponnetto and Provinciali worked a lot transfer, to develop, to customize this kind of analysis to adapt to the needs of using foiling system on different kind of board. They work both for several America's Cup teams, so I think that they have a very updated information to share with us. Yes. Working? Ok, fai tu. Se vuoi. Sì, sì.
So, good morning, everybody. So, as in the title, I would like to speak of the computational fluid dynamic methods that nowadays we have at disposal for foil design. But if you can go to the next slide. Before, I would like to talk a little bit of historical background for how we came with the tools that we really have. First sentence, but I think that we have to be very grateful to the engineer that decided to fly airplanes more than 100 years ago, because most of the tools that we have now at disposal in some way have been initially developed to make the airplane to fly. So the same technology that has been developed in aerospace design has been can now be used also for in the marine field, not also for foil design, but in general for sail design, and we will see later also for hull shape optimization and so on. So we don't really need CFD, computational fluid dynamic, complex fluid dynamic tools to design a wing. We can do very smart simplification and to achieve very good results. So I would say that despite the complexity of a real flow, there are some very smart simplification that really works well to understand how a wing is behaving. So please, next slide. One very clear example. In the left picture, I tried to make a drawing of what looks like the real flow around the two-dimensional foil. So we have streamline, we can see the red on the back of the foil that represent a high-speed flow. That means low speed, low pressure. We have a wake with turbulence and so on. So the flow is normally very complex. But we know that a very smart mathematical simplification of a fundamental equation of the physics works very well to represent the main feature, the principal feature of the flow. For example, we can say that the flow around the two-dimensional foil can be considered as the superimposition of a uniform stream with a vortex. We know this, and it works. This is for two-dimensional foil. If you go to the next slide, we also know that if we have two adjoining foil sections with different intensity of this vortex, there will be a wave shed that is another vortex. See, summing vortices, next slide, please. We can really write a very, very simple mathematical model that can give us, well, maybe I'm a little bit optimistic, say that 90% of information that we really need to make an airplane fly or a foil work can be found using this very simple model. For example, this model has been developed in more than 100 years ago by Lancaster and Frank independently, and it's called lifting line model. I can tell you that it's something that can be solved with a paper and pen or with an Excel file, and it is still used by foil designer as a preliminary tool for the designing the foil. So next slide. Well, we can find very elegant and simple formulation from very basic theory. Well, I put there 3 simple formulas that are valid in general for a symmetric profile, for an elliptical wing. So the lift coefficient, for example, is a constant by the angle of attack for a 2-dimensional foil. If we go to a 3-dimensional wing, the formula changes a little bit, and we have a new variable that is the aspect ratio of the wing. And we have another very simple formula that works under some limitation, but can give us a value of what is called in our aeronautic the lift-induced drag. It is a very important part of the drag of the foiling bolt. So next slide, please. So simplified to the maximum with this what we find in this slide, we could really design a first tentative wing. We know the aspect ratio of the wing, the span, the area. We know the relation between angle of attack and lift coefficient. If we go in the literature, we can find some drag coefficient of foil, and we can do a preliminary design of our foil. So next slide, please. Of course, sometimes we need more. And there are many additional information that we want to know that are very difficult to obtain with simple formulation. Because as soon as we want to know more about the flow, the mathematical complexity, the formula, the equation that we have to solve become, I say, exponentially more complex. Okay? So a simple model are very simple. If we want to know a little bit more, we go in a field very, very complicated. Okay? And in the past, still now, but for sure, in the past, the only way to know more about the wing and the flow around the wing was to make a model and to go in the wind tunnel and do experiment of physical models. So next slide, please. The good news is that beside the growing complexity of the information that we want to know, also the computer science has grown exponentially. So we have a computational power now that was unthinkable 20 or 50 years ago. So we can, we switch, or someone before me switched from trying to solve analytical this complex equation that was almost impossible to another approach numerically using the power of a computer. Okay? The big difference is that if we solve the equation analytical, we get formulas that can give us really a good insight in the physics. If we want to use computer, we make mathematical simulation, and the results are not formula but number. Basically, it's a virtual experiment. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, there are several different ways to solve this more complex problem. There are 2 principal classes of solvers, of a CFD, computational fluid dynamics solver. The simplest one, or the class of the simplest one, is they are called a potential flow solver. The basic simplification is that they neglect the viscosity of the flow, while the more sophisticated tools, solvers, are called, in general, viscous solver. So again, with potential flow solver, the effect of viscosity is in general neglected in the mathematical formulation, except where it is mandatory to consider the effect of viscosity. Viscous solver, they deal with viscosity, and there are different tools that can handle viscosity in different ways. So please, next slide. So in principle, also the lifting line that I mentioned before is a potential flow solver. So the viscosity is neglected in a fundamental formulation. And the wing or the foil is represented as a line. It's not a wing, but it's a line. If we take a section of this line, the section is a point. Okay. If we want to make the things a little bit more sophisticated and complex, instead of considering the point, the section as a point with a surrounding vortex, we can stretch chordwise this section, this point, and we have the so-called lifting surface formulation. If we want to do another step, we also consider the thickness of the foil, so the third dimension, and we go to what is called now the panel method formulation. So next slide. So you see what looks like the real flow, at least what we can see when the humidity helps us to visualize. We have a weight of vortices, we have a lift distribution along the span of a wing. So on the right corner up, we have the lifting line approximation. So there is a line that represents the wing with many vortices around it, and there are many lines that represent the wake. If we go to another step in the increasing the detail of the flow and of the wind, we go to the lifting surface approximation. So we stretch the line that represents the wing chordwise. We have different lines that can represent really the 2D section of our profile. And if we consider also the thickness, we go to the panel method formulation. But basically, they are built from the same approximation, but we neglecting the viscosity of the flow. So next slide, please. And I can tell you that the lifting surface and panel method have been really successfully used in the last 30 or more years. And although in the core of the theory, the viscosity is not taken into account, we can solve this ambitious flow, and then we can add a viscous effect in different ways. Okay, for example, adding another simple method that is a thin boundary layer method, coupled with a potential flow. Of course, okay, sorry, next slide. This is how it looks like the panel method visualization. This is a foiling boat. We have a foil, you can see, that is represented with panels on the surface. There are panels on the hull, of course it is in displacement mode. And there are panels that represent the wake that is shed from the foils. If you go to the next slide, again, this kind of method are very useful in a preliminary design phase because they are fast and cheap. What does it mean that they are fast? The computational time is very short, and they are cheap because I can run on a laptop, a very, very inexpensive laptop. Okay. We have another good thing that to solve the flow, I don't need to look at the flow itself, but I simply have to represent solve the solution at the boundary of the flow. So on the surface of a foil, in the wake, and in the hull. And once we know certain characteristic of the flow on the surface, on the boundary, I can know everything in any point of the fluid. Of course, there is a big limitation that, no, sorry.
I don't, sorry.
Yes. The last sentence. If viscous effects are really important, I cannot use panel codes because panel method results become more and more inaccurate or completely unusable. So if our foil is stalled and the stall is a viscous effect, I cannot use panel codes. So next slide. Okay, all the methods that I presented so far are directly straightforward developed from the aeronautical field. Okay, so I can take a code that has been developed to compute airplane wings, and I can use for foils. But we know that there are some some feature in marine foil that don't exist in airplane wings. So one big difference between an airplane and wing is the free surface, because the foil operates at the interface between two fluids, water and air. So, of course, the foil is perturbing this interface, and in general, we will have a production of a wave, spray, ventilation, and of course, we must be able to compute this phenomenon to make a proper design of our foil. Moreover, if a foil is sailing at very high speed, we can have an additional problem or effect, that is the so-called cavitation. So when in some point in the water, the pressure drops below the saturation pressure, the water change phases going from liquid to vapor phase. Okay, and this is another peculiar problem typical of the marine field. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so some kind of free surface problem can be computed with panel codes. So if we have a smooth, regular wave, like in a foiler when it's not foiling, panel codes can handle this problem very well. Okay. Next slide, please. We can do cavitation analysis also with panel codes. In this example, I've been working with propeller design for many years and developing panel codes for cavitation computation. So this is a case with of the cavitating propellers, and you can see the comparison between the cavity observed in the cavitation tunnel and the one computed with a panel payload. The same code, of course, can be applied also for a foiling pole. Next slide. But these are quite rough approximation of a real flow. So to properly capture all these free surface and cavitation phenomena all together, we need a more sophisticated codes. And what made possible to make a big step has been the introduction of a volume of fluid solver or similar methods, let's say more or less 20 years ago. And the both methods can really handle extremely complex free surface feature, spray, overturning waves, ventilation, and cavitation. Next slide. So this is an example. I try to push this foil to make more spray, of course. But you can see that this is a volume of fluid computation of a typical foil. And we can see that we can capture the spray. You can see a red line along the leading edge of the strut. That is the visualization of a cavitation. So there is vapor pressure inside that pocket. We can handle also the spray of the tip, but we can handle also the waves generated by the foil. Everything together. Next slide, please. Okay, and we can get a lot of information. And maybe we can go forward. These are the tools that we are normally using to design foils. And again, this is not a kind of computation. These are crosscuts of the free surface, starting from a section at the foil location, when you see how the water is rising from one side and going down to the other side, and downward cut where you see how the free surface is really contorted, generating, entrapping air, and so on. This level of information can be achieved only with the tools, high-end tools like a volume of fluid solver. Next slide. Well, I want to show you how we can, this is the typical path from the concept of the foil to the computation. So what we normally do is, of course, basing on idea, experience, to generate a new CAD geometry. Then we want to do the computation. So there are 3 separate processes. The first process is called the pre-processing. Basically is to mesh, to model numerically the geometry. In this case, if this is not a panel code, we had to put panels or cells not only at the boundary of our domain, but also inside the domain. The number of elements of cells rise enormously, so normally we can do computation with 10, 100 or more million elements. That means to solve a system of equation with million and million of variables. We cannot do this on a laptop normally, so we have to do with quite powerful parallel computation. So we need a cluster of processors that are working in parallel. Each processor doing computation on a specific part of the domain. Okay, so you can go. So to finish, there is an almost general consensus, at least from CFD user point of view, that sophisticated CFD solver can give a result equivalent in precision with some wind tunnel experiment for typical computation, production computation. There are pros and cons with both methods, experimental and CFD. Next slide. Basically summarize, CFD normally is faster, cheaper, and allow easy flow visualization, better flow inside. We can look at the flow much better than or easier than in a wind tunnel. We can control the boundary condition, the ambient condition, that sometimes are difficult to control in a towing tank or in wind tunnel, and we can do much more. Of course, we need a user that knows how to do, but also in a wind tunnel it's the same. And for sure, the physics is not perfectly reproducible. But, okay, we go to the next slide. One more sentence. That the way we normally use CFD until now has been to virtually replicate an experiment. So we have a benchmark experiment. We wanted to be sure that the CFD code is able to replicate it. So we tested like a virtual towing tank, like a virtual wind tunnel. And there are a lot of limitations in the experiment. In experiment, we had to fix the model that is constrained to a balance and so on. Now that we know that the CFDs are accurate enough, we can use CFD in a more clever way. So we don't have to simulate only steady condition, but you can simulate unsteady condition, maneuvering. We can consider the geometry, the foil in this case, as the formal, and so on. And we can do exactly the same as in the past, so to collect all the forces, hydrofoils, and put in a VPP, or next slide. We can do a global simulation. We can compute water and air all together. So simulate the boat with the sail, the wind, and everything, and cavitation, and do a global computation, but at this stage is more a double check that the VPP is doing things properly. And we can also couple CFD with finite element method to see the deformation and the stress of a foil under hydrodynamic load. This is something that will be extremely complicated to do in experiment, with experimental tools. So next slide is the last, I think. Okay. So, well, of course, there is a lot of development to do, and I think that there are a lot of merit in using CFD now. And thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much to Mario. The last speech of this morning is by Provinciali, and it has Caponnetto said, is very close to this to the previous speech, because the result coming from CFD analysis can use in a VPP program, and so I have to Provinciali to discuss of that.
So, thank you for this opportunity you're giving me. I can do it, and I can sit down if people don't mind. I think you can read me as well, because I need to read a little bit my text. Anyway, so I'm in charge of the title of my presentation was Performance Prediction Models to Support Sport Design. Some people have touched base on what a VPP is and does, and Mario has also mentioned the VPP. So I'll try to explain where a VPP is in the design loop, what a VPP is and does, try to mention quickly what different approaches you can have with a VPP for different yachts, different projects, different design phases. And then I'll try to touch a few points on the specifics of how we develop and use the VPP for foiling yachts, and also touch base, say 2 words about the what we call dynamic performance prediction or simulation, which are necessary for, especially for foiling yachts. So I'm in charge of the, well, I use VPPs and simulators since I've been using it for many years. So where a VPP is in the design loop, I obviously put it in the middle.
Of course.
Of course. And which is not untrue. So just to make clear of what is the goal of a design loop when we are talking about high performance yachts who are designed to win races or to win regattas. The goal is to provide the crew with the yacht or the yachts that have give them the best chances to win a regatta. So what factors contribute to that are obviously straight line performance, maneuverability, reliability, many other factors, but I think these 3 are the most important. And the VPP helps, especially with the first point, so evaluating straight line performance. The VPP helps with ranking different designs in terms of straight line performance. Normally, the VPP output would go in a race modeling tool, which comes after the VPP. A race modeling tool has weather models, race models, and so embeds losses, evaluation of the losses in maneuvers, and can really, for a number of designs, rank the designs and tell you, well, this design has most chances to win a race in this weather condition in this place. So the VPP, and then it's the race modeling that should guide the design choices. The VPP outputs are used also to estimate sailing parameters, so at what speeds, what angles, what leeway, what heel angle, etc. The boat will most likely be sailing in a straight line, and these are normally used as inputs to run the CFD or the experiments in the appropriate position. It's obviously useless to test a hull shape at 25 knots if that hull shape will never be able to sail at 25 knots because of other limitations. It does also help defining the ranges necessary for the trimming parameters of the appendages. Davide was mentioning the cant range, rake range, the folio range that he was able to embed in the C-class. Well, these numbers normally come from VPP that is seeing the best performance within those ranges. What's a VPP? It has been mentioned, but I would say that a VPP is basically a constraint optimizer. There is an objective function which the VPP has to maximize or minimize, depends on the sign you put in front of it, and this objective function has to be related to the yacht's straight line performance. As an example, a VPP will try to optimize the VMG for a certain throwing speed, VMG upwind or downwind. Or you can try to optimize the boat speed for a fixed throwing angle and throwing speed. Or in a more evolved way, you could try to optimize weighted averages or a VMG or VMM in a range of throwing speed, throwing angles. If one has a good model for the maneuvers, it could try to optimize time for a leg in a certain condition. I mean, one can complicate the objective function as much as you want, but at the end it has to be related with straight line speed. Some VPPs are used to fight other VPPs. This is typically what you do when you try to beat a rule or a rating system, like typically the ORC VPP against my VPP. I try to beat him to find the weak points so that we design a boat that maybe is very slow, but is still has a good rating and will win races in compensated time. What are the constraints of this optimizer? Well, the first constraint, the VPP wants to compute the boat speed essentially in an equilibrium, with a boat in an equilibrium. So basically the forces and moments have to be in balance. Then you want to make sure that the input and output parameters are within the ranges that are compatible with the forces models you have used as an input. And then you can decide whatever constraints you want to add. For example, you know that there will be limitation on the loads that appendages or part of the yacht can stand, so you will put those as limits so that the VPP doesn't find solution that will break the boat apart. Or, for example, especially in a foiling yacht, you want to make sure that the equilibrium points that the VPP finds are within certain stability ranges. Martin mentions the stability. You know that a falling yacht cannot sail at any point because some points are, yes, in equilibrium, but are unstable. So as soon as you go out of that equilibrium, you are lost, basically. So what you input in the VPP are aerodynamic and hydrodynamic forces and moments. These aerodynamic forces and moments come either from CFD. Lately, that's the main source of information for the VPP. But obviously, you can also run laboratory experiment to give inputs for the VPP. You can run full-scale experiments when the project and the budget allows. Or you can use analytical models. For example, those Mario mentioned, the lifting line, the panel code, or you can also use regressions on experimental data for similar yachts. That's typically what is used, for example, in the rating system. Obviously, another input is the throwing speed, and the outputs can be 100, but the basics are those that describe the straight line performance of a yacht, VMG, boat speed, or full board speed polars across the throwing speed and throwing angle range you are interested in. The VPP can output what I call boat attitudes, throwing angle, speed, sink, trim, heel, leeway, and then normally the VPP outputs what are the trim parameters that allow to reach that optimum solution. Typically rudder angles, sail stream. In the case of foiling yacht, you would look at foil brake, foil cant. In the case of a Moth, you would look at the flap angle, rudder angle, all the heel angle, all these parameters. And then the VPP will list any output that the forces models are able to provide. So one important thing about the VPP is that if the inputs are not accurate, the VPP will provide also inaccurate outputs. So will be very reliable in providing inaccurate results. So the secret of a good performance prediction lies essentially in the inputs, and which means ultimately in the tools that are created those inputs. how do design teams or yacht designers or engineers use the VPP for different design phases? Well, for a standard manual with a fixed keel, one rudder, hull in full displacement, well, the VPP could be what we call a 4 degrees of freedom VPP could very well do the job. It means that you don't really care. Well, the vertical force and the pitch moment are sort of solved outside the VPP, and so are not taken into account while doing the VPP simulation. For some project in the very early stages of the project, even 3 degrees of freedom just by ignoring the yaw moment equilibrium can be very useful. On faster monohulls like canting keel, dagger boats, the boats that Davide showed before, where the hydrodynamic vertical force and become important, then you cannot really you can only use 6 degrees of freedom VPPs to solve the complete equilibrium of the boat, which means running CFD or experiments that allow you to produce the proper inputs. For a multi-hull, ideally you would use a fast multi-hull. Ideally you use a 6 degrees of freedom, but again, in some early stages of the project, you can probably live with less degrees of freedom, 3 or 4. And then it depends on the design phases. In the early stage, you can do 3 degrees of freedom. You can basically forget about, depending on the yacht, of some of the equilibrium and just concentrate on others. And in some cases, you don't need to run CFD. You just rely on the analytical or regression fit hydrodynamic and aerodynamics model. What's specific to foiling yachts? Well, as I said, you can eventually, in the early stage of the project, you can look at only 4 of the 6 balances. You can look at the side force, the vertical force, the roll moment, and the equilibrium of thrust and drag. And you can really get a feel of the potential performance of your foiling yacht. But very quickly, you will be forced to get to the 6 degrees of freedom to typically add the pitch and the yaw moments, because these are very important when you start thinking about the stability of the solutions that you are coming up with. For a foiling yacht, at least the foiling yachts I've been working on lately, the transition between non-foiling and foiling mode is very difficult to model. Because there the hydrodynamic forces are changing quite abruptly. So, and the transition in when you design a yacht for a race in a specific venue and in a specific weather pattern, well, it's very important that you don't miss these parameters. So that's something that is pretty important for a foiling yacht, foiling catamaran. This is closely related to the true wind speed for foiling. True wind speed for foiling is basically related to foil size, and foil size has a negative impact on non-foiling performance, or in some other cases, for very high speed foiling performance. So again, to properly size your foil, you have to catch and pick the good true wind speed you want to boat to become foil-borne. Equilibrium on the foils is generally less stable than for a displacement yacht. Actually, some of the degrees of freedom are unstable, so the VPP for foiling yacht needs to include specific outputs or constraints to allow only sailable solution. The other very important part on the foiling yacht is the loads on the appendages and on the system that are keeping the appendages, connecting the appendages to the yacht. The VPP needs to be able to predict the straight line, steady state working loads for the guys that design the system and the structure to work on good basics and apply their dynamic coefficients and eventually security coefficients on the top of some proper static loads. If the static loads are too high, you'll end up with a too heavy structure, which is never good for a racing yacht. And then the other big point is something Mario and Martin, everybody mentioned here, is at high speeds and high loads, appendages start facing hydrodynamic phenomena as cavitation and ventilation, and ideally the VPP should include models for take into account these phenomena in order to avoid over-predicting performance or or designing appendages with too heavy load per square unit or other problems. And then for foiling yachts, the VPP can also be used, call it off optimum, as a tool for looking at a successive static equilibrium to become a quasi-static simulator. Some phenomena, it's true, that are dynamic, but the dynamics can be sufficiently slow that you can probably see those as a succession of steady state equilibrium. So it can help you, like for instance on the AC72, you all saw the beauty of the foiling jibes. Actually, some of the phases of the foiling jibe could be modeled in the VPP just to help, for example, at what cant and rake you want to drop the board, the new board. Well, that's something you can really start thinking about using a VPP. Just touch base on the dynamic performance prediction simulation. Obviously, dynamic performance prediction simulation can help with any type of high performance yacht, but more so for a foiling yacht. And they can be used to analyze not only static stability but also dynamic stability of foiling, analyze and improve sailing techniques, how to deal with transitions, maneuvers, like the transition for from a non-foiling to a foiling for upwind especially is quite delicate, because you've got to invest through wind angle to invest in speed, and that's a trade-off, and that's pretty big part of the being able to improve the performance. Dynamic simulation can help with the design of control system, because it will deliver dynamic loads. Simulation can be used to anticipate boat's behavior and eventually test maneuvers before you do it with a yacht in a storm and avoid catastrophic accident. It can help for crew training of the water. When the simulator is really a good tool, you can have the crew play with it and anticipate phenomena that they will see on the water. And obviously, dynamic simulator will improve the race modeling and all the tactical software. Typically, the starting software on an America's Cup boat is developed with an underlying dynamic model to support it. Obviously, to run dynamic performance prediction, the hydro and aero models need to be appropriate, include dynamics effects. Mario mentioned that the CFD can be run together, hydro, aero, unsteady. That is perfectly true, but you cannot run for the moment. You cannot think to run all the condition, all the situation in the CFD. The computers are powerful, but still not enough. So for the moment, CFD and VPP are still complementary. They are used together, and will continue to be so until one day, which is not far probably, CFD will become quick enough to become embedded in the VPP. So basically, the VPP will, the hydrodynamic and aerodynamic models will not be simplified models, will be the CFD, and so at that time we will really be able to have a simulation of the full yacht. So that's a little bit my quick overview on the VPP side. I have the chance and the luxury to work with the America's Cup design team, so I'm really lucky to get the best inputs from the best guys doing CFD and all and structure and system. So it's a very, very nice opportunity. I have to work in that environment and use the VPP for this kind of yachts, which are quite special lately. On the other hand, I miss a lot what James described, because my only thing is a VPP, is a computer screen. Sometimes it crashes, but it's not the same feeling as when you have a small breakage on a yacht, but you are on the water and you are enjoying. That's life.
Thank you, Giorgio, for this last contribution. I think that we are a bit late, but I think also looking at the water that we will have to wait for the wind, so we can spend some time for discussion. And then I invite all the speakers at the table. We have to take some chairs more, and I invite also a Fullerton. If you want to share, to help me in manage the discussion. I imagine that during the morning, several information, we receive a lot of number of information, and so you could have some questions to put to the speakers, and we have time now to use the presence of all these professionals to exchange.
No. Say.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, good. Thanks, Kevin.
You prefer? Okay. Or if you like, you can do it without.
Okay, it's been a long and very informative morning, but if you can bear with us for a little bit longer, as Andrea says, the conditions are a little bit manx, so it would be nice to have some feedback and some questions from the floor. You won't probably get this opportunity again anywhere to have this group of experts that have talked to us this morning, and the information they've given us is second to none. So this is an opportunity we probably won't get again. For me, my name is John Fullerton. I'm a sailing journalist, freelance. I have a little website called Grand Prix Sailing. When I heard about the Foiling Week some months ago, I was really enthusiastic. I decided I must be there. This is something that I need to attend as a sailing journalist, and I'd like to see more others here, but we can spread the word for them. And as I say, this is a chance to speak to these people. So I think it would be nice just to get some general questions. If you have some questions for anybody particularly, maybe you can address them by name, otherwise to the panel, and we can get some discussion, some feedback going. Maybe I can start the ball rolling just to get some little momentum and generally ask the panel. Maybe I start with Martin, as you started the discussion from the development, and just ask you and anybody else who'd like to contribute in the next 5 to 10 years, let's say, what do you think will be the next significant development in the area of foiling and flying boats? Maybe just to get a...
I think the main focus will be on making sailing those boats easier, such that a wider group of people can really handle them. Of course, the performance also, but I think in terms of performance, we are really not that bad. The big next step, the big improvement has still to be done in handling, ease of sailing with those boats. And then it will take, or we'll get into, as I said, at the end of my talk, we'll get into cruising boats as well.
Anybody else along the panel here like to?
I'll field it.
Yeah?
I'll field the question. I think that the long distance records, the transatlantic and others will be shattered, totally shattered in the next 5 years. I really believe that. I think it may start with the sort of offbeat ones like Dakar Guadeloupe, but they're all going to fall to foils, no question. It's only a question of reliability, and it's getting better and better and better. So how could it not?
And in your presentation, we've obviously heard a lot about multi-hulls, and with the recent America's Cup, the development was all sort of very, very fast and very frequent. In fact, we started the America's Cup with downwind foiling, and we ended up with upwind foiling in that little time.
We started the America's Cup with no foiling.
No foiling, yeah. It was very interesting when you mentioned about the monohull and the larger monohull, let alone the Moths, which we've understood has been foiling for many years now. But you mentioned the monohull. I mean, do you see that leading to speed records, or?
Oh, is speed rocket a monohull? Is it?
Well, it's good question.
It's not really a multi-hull either. It's a pure foiler in a way, the second generation of it. I think that the first generation of sail rocket was a monohull for the most part, and I think that as you continue to decouple your performance ability from your heeling, like they did by inclining the sails and aligning the foils to take the loads, I think that it's inevitable that the monohulls will fly, and more reliably and bigger, because you're going to start decoupling, as I put, also mass. The way we are trying to do it is with foils on the keel to replace some of what we need statically, hydrostatic sense. And eventually I think that will grow into less and less mass, easier and easier foiling, less and less loads in the boat while it's out of the water.
I'd just like to take a very controversial view that it's got to be fun, of course, and small is beautiful. And it's not surprising that small boats fly more easily. You only have to use the cube law to realize why a supertanker isn't going to go on foils, and even the big aircraft are pretty tricky. But just take two boats, the current generation of foilers, which are unbelievable, and I take Mayfly, which no design credit, but I was the owner and there all those years ago. And what Mayfly was more fun to sail than anything. And I imagine that these new Moths are more fun to sail than anything, and all I want is someone offer me a ride when the wind gets up, and I'll die happy. But I think that the small and beautiful is very important. And with the exception of breaking ocean records and the publicity they get and attract, I think that as you get bigger, of course the problems get greater. And if it wasn't for the records, it's a wonderful stimulus. I don't think recreational large boat sailing would involve hydrofoils, because of the complexity and the hazards and the prescribed range of conditions you have to put in. So, you forgive me, but I'm just saying small is beautiful.
I'm just talking about where Moths might go. I think the last few years, a lot of work's been done to aerodynamics. We're reducing drag in the air. And we've got fairings on things that nobody thought about a while ago. The consequence now, I think, the extension of that will be that all the appendages above the wings and the fittings and everything will shrink in size and be much more streamlined. And eventually, I think the crew, the skipper's going to have to probably not hike, but sit in behind something or other, because windage has become so big. And we saw that was a big difference between Oregon and New Zealand. The aerodynamic package on Oregon was better, and they ended up getting a minute advantage on the legs. So I think windage is becoming more important as we go so fast through the air. And as such, because that's going to be a lot more effective on Moths than it is on boats with two hulls and a whole lot of other stuff sitting up in the air. I think that's going to be an innovation.
It was interesting, now 2 or 3 years ago, I think the Moths had their World Championships in Belmont in Lake Macquarie, where the wings first appeared.
Yes.
I mean, I guess one question would be: do you see that returning, or is that a question of cost?
Most of this year building one. I don't think it's good for class. It's terrible. It's spent so much time and effort in it, and I don't know when it's going to work yet. It's a big expense to experiment on in Moths. Moths traditionally has been a tinkerer's boat where people had an idea, built it, tried it, and either worked. So all the analysis that we've seen this morning is definitely necessary if you want to spend $1 million. It's not necessary if you want to spend a couple of $100. You just build it and try it. Andrew has done a lot more computer work than most people, and I think once you get into manufacture, it's absolutely necessary. You need it for the tooling anyway. But a lot of the experimentation in Moths over the years has been just people building stuff in their shed because they had an idea.
But is the foiling package very different for use with a soft sail as for a wing, or are they?
No, well, it hasn't been. The two boats that have had wings so far are just standard package. I'll tell you in 6 months' time whether my idea's any good. There's no point telling anyone much until it see if it works.
Sure.
But no one else, no other tinkerers, there's hardly any tinkerers left. 80% of the class buy make two, or an XC, or other good day. The tinkerers have gone. People just like sailing the boats because they're great to sail. And so there's not going to be enough tinkerers to develop anything that's better. The manufacturers aren't interested because if you produce this thing commercially, it would cost as much as a boat. That was just fine. 5 people buy them, win the regattas, and everyone else will be pissed off and leave. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's just something I've had in my head for a long time and promised myself I'd do it. And then even if it goes fast, I won't win races to do it anyway.
Any queries or questions from the floor? There must be some questions for this fine group of panelists here. Anybody?
I'd like to address my question to Martin Fischer. You present us the airfoil, and the question is whether somebody was trying that the tip of the air will point not up but down, because when it points up and coming to the surface, it loses the efficiency, whereas pointing down, the efficiency will be higher.
Actually, you can achieve the same sort of the same stability with the tip that goes down, but then in order to get it heave stable, it must go outward and down. Yeah, and if you don't have any control mechanisms, and then what happens then is if you look at the camber, so in that case the suction side of the foil switches at the angle from one side to the other, and that reduces the effective span, or the aspect ratio. So the effective aspect ratio goes down to half, basically, and that increases drag. So such a foil, you can achieve the same heave stability with such a foil, but the drag is significantly higher. On the other side, the righting moment is also higher, so one has to check which one works better, or which effect is bigger.
Is that what the air capture does?
No, that would be outside the rule. You have to stay in the maximum.
So they've gone down,
Yes, the A-class, they go down and inward, but they go with 2 foils. I mean, they are only stable because they have 2. They cannot sail on 1 foil.
Thank for Mario. It's about the drag.
About, sorry?
About the amount of drag caused by the strike.
Mm-hmm.
And as we can see, the Moth, the foil, we have where we have an inserted profile on the person's face. The price is very little. In the foil, like the hotel, we have a lot of drag. So cruise drag.
With what?
The cruise drag.
Yes, is I would say that when you have a free surface, you can you have wave, you have spray, you have induced drag, you have a pressure field that generates drag, and it's difficult to say what is induced drag, what is wave drag, what is spray. The other thing is that probably spray drag can be important, but not so important compared to the visual effect that it can give. So we can have a very big spray, but if we measure or if we compute the drag associated with it, is not so big compared to the viscous drag of a foil that we cannot see. Visually, we cannot see the friction, we see the spray, so we think that is something very important. There are very simple formula that you can find on books that gives more or less an indication of a spray drag quantity, basically related to the thickness of the foil and the speed. And what we are trying to do is to have more insight in this field. Honestly, I don't have a final answer of how to reduce the spray drag. We try to learn more.
Some more technical questions from the floor?
I've got questions for whomever would like to try to answer it. It seems that the CFD and engineering results have become so refined that a lot of it hinges on the quality of the mesh itself. And I've never seen really how it work, but I'm wondering how much development is happening on the actual generating of the mesh before you put it in the model.
Mm-hmm. So the big bottleneck of CFD has always been the meshing. So we can have a very good mathematical model, but we crash against meshing complex body.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of development, so we can use now very different kind of measure, very different methodology. And honestly, I mean, 10 years ago, I used to work with a structure mesh that are very good for the result, but very difficult to use when you have something more complex than a single foil. I mean, a foil, if you have something more, I mean, if you want to mesh a Formula 1 car and do CFD, you need something more easy, that can handle intersectional geometry and so on. Then there are other methods that are meshless, so like a particles method where you don't mesh the volume of a fluid, but you use other techniques. For very complex body and for a very complex movement of the body, this can be a possible way, a possible improvement for sure.
How many cells are we talking about when you were talking about the full simulation of Fahrenheit? How many cells are we talking about?
We have done some simulation of a 72 fully upblended in waves, and we are talking about 100 million cells, but probably you need more to have a very good result. But it's something that you can easily manage now, nowadays. Yes. 15 years ago, we used, 1 million cells. It was, Alessandro Castelli was working with me at APFL. 1 million cells was already something difficult to manage, but it's just a matter of computational power.
Further questions? See a hand come up over here. Yeah.
With the Moth, you find quite a difference between the whole to water. It's not a huge difference, but it's enough to make a difference, but it's quite a large difference in the way it works, particularly with ventilation, and how the bond affects the flow over the travelling water. I have a suspicion of what it is, but has anyone actually trained work with it? It seems during about 16 degrees, top water, but we get quite a change in what happens when it's way through. Does anyone know how to work?
Can you describe the difference? Cold water does what?
The cold water you start to ventilate quite dramatically. It starts about 16 and gets depressed. And if the vertical sections and terrible, like laser on just to ventilate really bad, it makes it better. But it's still, you can notice if you have a foil very much in line with the verticals, a lot of and disturbance, you get much less problems in cold water.
The answer's down there.
The answer's down here?
The answer's definitely down there. Or it's fake. You should be able to.
Sounds like we might have to do some homework on that one and come back tomorrow with something.
Ventilation is a very difficult phenomenon because it's like I run experiments in a towing tank where the water is perfectly steady and constant temperature, running foils, and you do a run at 40 knots and everything goes well, and the next run you just hit a particle on the water or a little something on the water, you go through that and the ventilation explodes. So in general, ventilation is a very, very difficult phenomenon. And I know that all the Moth sailors report what you just reported, the temperature has something to do with it. Personally, I find it very difficult to find a correlation. It has to do, for sure, most probably with the stability of the boundary layer somewhere at the interface. But
probably what you have. Sorry, you said something in this room that I missed the word.
Stability of the boundary layer is what I think you said.
Yeah, before that.
That it's an unstable, it's something that is a little bit difficult to predict, even for numerical tools. Correct me if I'm wrong, but numerical is very, very difficult to. Cavitation is predictable, ventilation is much less. And even experimentally, it's very difficult to. You have to, if you go on the web, I'm sure you've seen videos of people trying to get ventilation, so touching the flow just before the leading edge of an airfoil and obviously triggering the ventilation. So it's pretty particular. You know. It's true there is water temperature related.
I have a theory.
The solution, of course, is to sail close to the equator.
How did that, gentlemen?
Yeah, Chris Evans can see just to chip in on that. I agree with what the panel said. It's really good.
Why is it now?
So, yeah, I agree with the panel. It's a very difficult problem to model ventilation. We've done some work on it. Can't answer your question. But all I can say is we had a problem with ventilation on sea life. The only way we could get a handle on it is through high-speed photography. That's what I'm actually saying. And what we discovered is, I mean, a lot of ventilation work is done in 2D seconds, and so on. But what we discovered is a very pretty approach. So it is the immersion is changing. You're getting some really interesting effects. Air actually trains on the floor surface. So as the immersion increases, that air will remain attached. This is tiny bubbles of air. Just momentarily, we're probably talking about this effect. And that should allow ventilation to then trigger. So really just by way of an illustration of how difficult the problem it is to model. As I say, we didn't take that work any further because we actually solved the immersion problem. So we said that the range of challenges was that problem. So, I mean, my view is if you get a look at this slope here, what's going on with you are so I think I'd be interested to have a slope. But I think, as I say, our experience is and you've got to do that under research, and as I say, when we did it, it's amazing how much we learned. That's not in the public domain. So.
Maybe I can add another comment about the ventilation. I've been working on surface piercing propeller design for many years, And in that case, the section are designed to promote ventilation. And when you do this, you have the code that predict very well what you design for. So you will predict ventilation very well. It's a little bit more complex when you design a section not to ventilate, and in perfect condition is not ventilating, but in a steady condition with, depending on the quality of the water, you can have very different results. So we have the codes, but it works very well when you want to promote the ventilation, and for sure is the physics, the reality is much more complex when you want to analyze something that is designed to not ventilate.
I have a question for the Moth historian. If ventilation from the wand, or induced by the wand, on the main foil is a notorious problem, why is the wand where it is?
It's offset.
It's offset to one side, and does that lead to a port starboard variation in this effect? Naturally, it must.
The top sailors make adjustments on port and starboard tack to compensate.
Okay. And what other locations have been experimented with in the history of the class? What other locations for the wand have been experimented with?
People have tried them on the back of the centerboard, which is what the laser kit does.
Right.
That proved adequate in smooth water and hopeless in rough water.
Okay.
It seems to be the distance we have is about right, which is coincidental really, because the bow was always there and the centerboard's moved forward about this far since we started foiling. There is an English boat which has the centerboard and the mast further forward, and they've put a strut out the front with a wand on the end of that. We have a limit of 0.5 metre front and back for any extra bits, excluding the rudder, so they can only go out 0.5 metre. But generally speaking, if it's in front of the foil, we have it raked off centre so that it doesn't, the wake doesn't interfere with
and laterally off of the front of the wings?
Yes, the people have tried one on either wing and operating the flaps independently. It didn't work particularly well. Ended up, there was a structural problem in that the flap is very strong when it's in one piece. If you cut it in half, the hinges have got a much more load on them and you tore a hinge off. And unless you have some differential system, the boat sails vertical, which we found is slow. We have to sail the boat heel about 20 degrees to windward, so that the lifting foil then also contributes all the lateral resistance, and the vertical foils fly at 0 angle of attack and have half the drag.
Right. Yeah. More efficient foil with asymmetrical.
Yeah.
When you have a theme for the long foil,
That certainly tested the grey matter. Any further? Yes, go.
From the sailor perspective. What would you see as, since we are talking about progress in foiling, also in ocean-going vessels, and all this, what do you see as a sort of speed limit that, let's say, a single-handed monohull like Moth can do in a few years, and an ocean-going vessel can do in a few years from now? What are you thinking of? Are we going to do around the world at 60, 70 knots, or 50 or 40, and can, let's say, Moth kind of boats in a few years reach 35, 40? Do you see something like that happening? And yes, no, why?
Any takers on this one?
Martin? Sorry?
Would you like to just kick that one off?
Yeah, well, I don't think that we will sail around the world at 60, 70 knots. I think cavitation is a real problem. Of course, you can design foils that work perfectly, or sections that work perfectly when they're fully cavitated, but at least up to now they're very bad at lower speed, and it's very difficult, I think, to get a foil setup that works with cavitation and without. Of course, we could imagine to have different foils and you swap foils basically as a function of speed. Don't know. Could be engineering. It's an engineering solution then. Let's put it that way. If cavitation remains an issue, then that basically limits the speed.
250.
Yeah, below 50.
Below 50. So I'd say that you go more towards getting your lift out of the air when you get to those speeds. You'd have a sailing in front of
I think for the cross-Atlantic record, which is already very fast, it's a difficult one to beat, but the sail rocket concept could work. Obviously, on a much bigger scale, but if you do the cross-Atlantic, you never jibe, you never do one single maneuver. So, but for the
transatlantic, it's
didn't jibe. Only Grogono jibed and they lost 2 hours. So.
They had to. There's England in the way.
So on an asymmetric spatial yacht like say rocket, but going 60 knots in waves with cavitation and ventilation is going to be trickier than in Nigeria or whatever. And,
let me also add to the discussion. When we talk about foiling monohulls offshore, what you're talking about is extending those high-speed runs that you get. Right now that's done with driven plane. I mean, a Grogono Volo 70 goes in a driven plane. It stays up in planes all the time. But you're talking about taking a smaller boat like a Mini that perhaps can't do that constantly and has average speeds in the 12, 14 knot range over long periods of time. That's fantastic sailing, don't get me wrong. And you're talking about trying to get, every time they accelerate and go to 17, 18 knots, you're talking about starting earlier and going farther with each of those speed runs and going a little bit faster. So you're going to tick off the miles faster. You're not talking about the kind of stable flight that we're seeing in AC-72s in the C-class in the short term. That in a monohull is still quite a few engineering tricks away, I think.
Can I just what's the maximum speed with the, let's say, classical cross-section of the hydrofoil? Is it 40, 42? Depends on the hydrofoil load. And tomorrow I will present step design on the hydrofoils, and if we have, let's say, 60 degrees of the step angle, that's cosinus 60 is 0.5. And we can multiply by 2 this maximum speed. That's and of course, we can go to super cavitation mode as well.
I think there is another aspect that will allow a better speed is advanced system, control system. So we can think about morphing foils, changing shapes, and so multiple surfaces. So I think in the next years we will see developments on systems. So passing from a mechanical one that is obviously for the rule, etc., to advanced electronics. System. So sensors and computer will be able to guide this variable section foils or appendages. So that will definitely help to enhance the speed.
This would be a computer on board the boat that would that would activate these systems. Is this what you're saying?
That definitely they will have to do what maybe a person alone cannot do.
Yeah.
So, and taking under control a lot of variables that are affecting the performance. So the computer will have to maximize performance. It's not the revolution. Yes, it's just an extension of what we see already in the boat.
And how will that sort of work with the actual sailors? Or I mean, what you're saying is, how much more is technology going to overtake the actual sailors operating the boat? How do you see that?
Yeah, it's that
mix developing. I mean,
we're done for. It's not possible, but this is what engineers.
Professional sailors could retire.
They need to become more and more technical.
Okay.
They just
Yeah. Maybe less enjoyable.
Less meat on the rail, but more.
My experience is that with the sailor, nowadays we face engineers, aerospace engineers that are professional sailors.
Yeah.
And so there are professionals doing that and sailors that are speaking the same language, and actually they are doing very well.
So the coaching is going to come from the design and the engineering side.
I'm afraid that they're one and the same. I mean, I've had the opportunity to work with Misha Himskirk over the last few months, and I want to tell him that I know something about boats, but he knows everything that I could tell him already. So it's not coming from the engineers at all. It's that the engineers are, the sailors that we see coming to the top are better engineers.
Okay.
In the case of the A-class, it's pretty
obvious.
not obvious, but pretty realistic.
Any more questions on a different subject or more technical engineering?
I've just one fantasy about crossing the oceans at high speeds. Obviously, everything that's on the surface is a hull and it's splashing about, it's getting in the way. The strength of modern materials, as shown by the Moth, could have streamlined struts piercing this dreadful interface up to X wave height, say 2 or 3, possibly even 4 meters, and you don't carry anything through the interface except an extremely streamlined strut underneath some foils, and above a sail rocket kite or an ordinary kite, and a little pod where sits a man sweating. I mean, the interface is a menace. It's a menace in flat water, because you lose, you get ventilation and you lose lift in the foils and everything. But in the ocean, you've just got to think big enough to have beautifully streamlined cutting foils to get you away from the disturbance. Or is this impossible?
That's already being developed in cars, on the parts of
But is it?
and they're just started developing like a hydrofoil anchor.
Yeah.
The person is suspended 10 meters away.
Yeah.
5 meters away.
Yeah.
And they fly the kites and it's tall lines.
It's not. My idea is not new. Nothing's ever new.
That's pretty exciting sensation. I've never tried it, but down in South France, people leaving away in workshops putting things together. Do you see there's a huge difference between kite flying and all of the other hydrofoiling, all of the other hydrofoiling sailing vessels have auto stabilization. And with a kite foil, we become ballerinas because we control the incidence of the kite or the foil in water. I personally think that if you have some sort of auto depth sensor and system mechanism which can change the angle of attack between the two winds, then you would get some sort of auto stabilization when I sail between the Moth sailors. It seems that the Moths are super stable. For us, it's the real, whoa, it's all over the place, depending on whether you relax and in one way or the other. What's your take on that auto stabilization?
More for the fluid.
There's one in Sydney already.
Yeah.
For a kite. They're learning how to sail.
Okay.
It's coming.
Okay. And do you know a crossover? It's using,
It is a kite, for a kite.
No, but in the sense of kite exist, I'm saying, rising to 6 years. That's the question is more based on the auto stabilization of the foil. Is it auto stabilization?
Yes, it has them on. It has them on the flat.
Okay.
Yeah. Just on the trailing edge of the vehicle.
Okay.
So it's yeah.
It's
not going to respond like as if it was 1.5 meters out the front, but it'll have more control than the do with the
Well,
balance.
it loses its sense of being a surf craft. You've got one.
Well, it's made for racing.
Yes.
And you might find the solution for auto stabilization in the electronics package. You can get a gyro stabilizing device for remote control aircraft for what was the price? $75 US. It's ridiculous.
15.
I mean, it's ridiculous, and it's about the size of a. I would like to say a pack of cigarettes, but no one says that anymore, do they?
Smaller than
about the size of a pack of cigarettes or a pack of matches, and it can output basically signals to a servo motor. And if you put those servo motors in a position in a foil system that's not heavily loaded, you can achieve, based on gyroscopic input, based on the changes in the motion of the board in your case, without the need for another wand or the distance to the water that you're talking about, an input that will help adjust a flap on a foil. We're not talking about big loads with a kite. So I think that you might find a solution there in electronics.
Yeah.
Remote control aircraft.
The aircraft funnel will give you the 3 axes, but it won't give you V. But surely the experts could modify it.
Okay, we'll get to the chemicals if you can.
It's coming like waves by that next summer, or it's coming like, it's coming like I should save my money for one of those next summer, or should I get a pet flow now and come in eventually?
It's all going to go to Moth's taking over.
I got one of those. It's got the set.
I missed the start of the question.
The foiling board with the wand.
Yeah, it's a foil system with a wand that bolts on the water.
Yeah, is that going to be semi-commercially available?
I doubt it.
Pardon?
I doubt it. There's one made for one guy, and they're playing with it.
Yeah.
And they're the people involved are only interested in making stuff, working out whether it works, and then having the next big idea and making something else. So, yeah.
There seems to be a pretty strong consensus that we need to make foiling easier, and that being able to foil stably and consistently is paramount for achieving performance. Is anybody working on just what good handling qualities mean in the context of sailing? What should we? I think there's sort of a general idea of what feasibility is. Has anybody done any work on trying to determine just what the handling qualities ought to be?
Can I ask the answer? It's actually for tomorrow presentation. Give us 2 tips. Lovely for concept. It's a concept without any movable surface. Because we would like to launch our product to the market, and the market needs simple things, no complicated things. And tomorrow I will explain how it works. And it's stable in all 3 dimensions. And additionally, as I explained before, it's a thread hydrofoil design, and correlation I will explain tomorrow.
I guess where I was starting my question is, in the aerospace world, we have, there was a lot of research that went into determining what, hand quality specifications, what, how an airplane should behave, so that you could then design to that requirement. I don't know if anybody's trying to do anything like that in the type of
Nice. You may I think I think with foiling sailboats, we are at the moment at the stage where those are only developed for race boats, and there the only criterion that counts is performance and whether the crews can still handle it. So therefore, I think nobody has really worked on criteria that or descriptions on how it should behave. But of course, if that will be applied to cruising boats or commercial things, then I reckon there should be some guidelines then.
I'll fix that. It should have a lower takeoff speed, higher cavitation speed, and be really easy to launch and retrieve.
Totally stable.
You never have to swim back.
Launch and retrieval crossover, I think, would be
I think the first thing we did was a complete nightmare, but it was also exciting, it was new, and we thought we were pioneers, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, straight after, I lost a lot of friends on the beach with these guys in their suits going up to the shoulder because they didn't realize that you couldn't let go until the boat was in the water. But no, of course, it's got to be practical, unless you can try and break a record, but it doesn't matter. Any record. But that's the point about recreation. Recreation is the biggest and the best thing. And I don't want to repeat what I said about simple and small and beautiful.
It was a big talking point. I was at the A-Class Cat Worlds in Takapuna in New Zealand. I don't know whether anybody else in the room was there, but it's a class which I follow closely, very keen to follow closely. But obviously in the last year or so, they've suddenly taken a huge leap into foiling, particularly after San Francisco. And that particular class, we're in a big dilemma, the same as a number of classes, with the cost of development and the new materials, and they've gone from all through the foils you described earlier, B, J, T, L, and now they had a big vote at the time to limit the amount of development because they were worried about the systems of internally applying the foils, and also what you're talking about, the launching. Obviously, for their hardened A-class sailors that have been with the class for a long time, they don't particularly like the fact that, you know, the Slingsbys and the Nathan Outridges are going to sort of take away their sport to a new dimension, but at the same time they understand they're in a development class. But one of the big issues was all about this, well, if we're going to have to launch it with the foils all intact, we've got to get into that water. The boat's only 75 kilos, it's not a Moth, but still, you know, we need a team to help us. So it's an interesting dilemma, and you know, how that develops, particularly in the dinghy field, will be quite interesting. How they get over those hurdles.
The Moth, obviously got the dinghy field itself at the moment. They've only sold 50 of those laser foils out of 250,000 laser foils, so they're not doing that well. The difficult parts about the Moth is putting it together and carrying it into the water and having a site where you can do that and back out again at the end. And the unstable nature of the hull when you're not foiling. Once you're up in foiling, it's remarkably stable. And if you're going a little boat at that speed, it wouldn't matter what it was, it's going to have some crashes. So it's not the fact that the hull's this big, the hull's irrelevant once you're foiling. It's a little short. So if someone really wanted to make a better boat, you'd start with the Moth and say, well, what's wrong with it? Well, it's a bit cumbersome getting in and out of the water. It's a bit bulky to handle when it's the store in a clubhouse, for instance, because it's 2.25 metres wide. So I've talked to a few people, and they didn't sell 250,000 lasers for no reason. That was the right size boat that people could handle. You can obviously build a hull about the size of a laser out of carbon, or about 1/3 the way. Put a Moth rig and hydrofoil on it and a trapeze that would sail the same as a Moth and have the same riding moment, the same mass. It would be more stable in pitch because it would be longer. It would be much easier to get in and out of the water and store in a clubhouse. So if you're talking about, you know, Doug Lord's quiddle spoiler, that's probably it, but don't tell Doug Lord.
So about 4 or 5 minutes. Anybody like to make any further contributions? As I say, it's going to be very little chance to have this sort of calibre of people here, except in the next couple of days. But it's an ideal opportunity to, yes.
On the subject of today, just two points. One question to all the financial communities, on different figures, or with American speech. What will be in the next 10, 20 years? Second point, because I think we are learning a lot from we can take nature,
we can't hear you.
Can you speak louder? Come closer.
Come closer.
Just come a bit closer, and we can just hear your question. Sorry.
First question to me is speed on the water. Do we need new rules of traffic on the water? The second one is the only design and taking a look on the nature. How the nature is going from about the air, right? And under the water also.
So I still didn't catch the first one you were asking. I'm sorry.
He's asking about the rules of navigation.
Oh, rules of navigation.
Traffic.
With these speeds, do the rules of navigation change? That's his question.
So more of a sort of safety concept.
Yeah, probably we should think about that.
I think generally it's a difficult one to answer. When we're talking about specific regattas, obviously they come under auspices of certain rules and bodies and organisations. At the moment, my understanding is just ordinary boating, sailing. It's very difficult to sort of employ rules on. I think we were talking about earlier on about the safety of the speeds, but it's very much dependent on where you're actually sailing.
I think I give one example. In the United States, the right-of-way rules for land yachts give the right-of-way to the leeward yacht when you're going to windward, but you give the right-of-way to the windward yacht when you're going downwind. And that allows the windward yacht to be able to bear away in a gust. Just like you can head up in a gust when you're going to windward. So they've changed the normal right-of-way rules because of the nature of the craft.
Because of apparent wind speed.
And at basically the same apparent wind angles and speeds that the Moths are now sailing.
We haven't changed any rules in the Moths. We haven't even changed the boat lengths to avoid rule, which in a Moth at that speed is totally ridiculous. But we have a culture of avoiding everybody. Because if you hit somebody, it doesn't matter if you're in the right or the wrong, you crash, you stop, you might break something, you might ruin your day.
I think we just super enough a rule that we have to take 40 meters of light.
Yeah, well, that's fine for racing, but I think also in general navigation, you go out foiling here and you're around people that have no idea what you're doing, no idea why you're going so fast, or what's going to happen if you have to change direction. It is a challenge. I don't have any answers for you, unfortunately. I don't know what the solution is, but it's there's going to be accidents.
We have had crashes. We've had plenty of crashes, a lot of damaged boats. Fortunately, we've never injured seriously any people. People are starting to wear crash hats. It was probably still uncool until the America's Cup people started doing it. So now a lot of Moth people are doing it as well.
I think it's on all of us to take care about this problem. Because we are so on the beginning. Yes. I was working on ice-tracking or handboarding from 2000 years before. Was the same. How to collect with the research. So the whole industry. But during the years, we found out the also one issue.
It's also environment. We've had people kill fish and birds as well with falling nets.
I think that was your second comment was about nature related, was it?
Well, bio-inspired design.
I think we're also in that.
I think these big foils, medieval things that we use, outboard and knife edge at the front, would cleave a swimmer into two clean halves, and we just would wouldn't go within 50 meters of any swimming activity or anything had bodies in the water. I mean, there they are, and I would never hang a man on a trapeze in front of a fast-running hydrofoil, because it would cleave him in two clean halves if the trapeze foil. So the rule for the on-board is never put anyone in front of these sharp-edged outboard foils. I think it's the attraction of the L ones that they're all in under. But I couldn't agree with you more. You just got to do it a long way away from human beings in the water, from your own craft or from on the shore.
Just about time to wrap up. Any very final, quickly? Still two. Gentleman there in the blue shirt. Yep.
I have a question for Mario. In know, I mean, we repeat many times that one of the biggest problems on the design of the core is the ventilation. Control the ventilation, to know how to control the ventilation. In the CFD, there is a second problem, of course, the numerical ventilation, but it was possible somehow to solve with some tricks the numerical ventilation. Do you believe that in the future, in the same growth or anyway, in the reality, it be possible to avoid the ventilation with some system like it's possible with the CFD?
Honestly, I don't know. So we are still in a phase where we want to understand more about the physics, how to manage this problem. And for sure, there are devices very simple like fences that can help.
The fixed nothing with CFD were simple to avoid the ventilation. So I believe that there could be some ways in the reality to avoid the ventilation in the same way.
Yeah.
To go the same comment.
Maybe yes.
Okay, I think it's been a thoroughly interesting morning. I think we're going to go back to Andrea to just have a wrap up, and I think the sun's coming out, so we might even get on.
Some wind. Yeah. Only just to thank to all the speakers. We had a very interesting morning, and it's on the beginning because it's the first day of the forum. Thank to all you all for the attention, for the participation. I ask to Luca if you have something to tell about the organization of the afternoon and something else. Please take notice that tomorrow morning we start 1 hour earlier, so at 9 o'clock we will start. So I think we can close here, and we have all the activities scheduled for the afternoon. Okay.
Thank you.
And